We'll reconvene the September meeting of the Board of Curators public session. The first item on the agenda, Curator Snowden, is the report and recommended action from the Academic, Student, and External Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We really have only two items on the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, and that is the consideration of two new degrees, and Dr. Steve Graham is with us, and he will present both of them.
Good afternoon. We have two degree programs today to look at. As was mentioned, a Bachelor of Science in Actuarial Science and a Master of Science in Explosives Technology. Let me start with the Actual Science degree program. Although I think both of these have a lot in common, I think this particular program is a very wise and smart move on the part of the campus. It's taking three departments, math, finance, and economics, and they will be working. They have a certificate program that exists now, but they'll be collaborating on a new bachelor's program in actuarial science. So it gives it a nice interdisciplinary flair. These are jobs that are probably in high demand. The pay is good. They've done some work in the community. You'll see nice support letters from people that would like a full program. This particular program will be better in the sense that it not only surpasses the quality of the certificate program they offer, but it allows them to sit for the first, there's a series of exams for actuarials, and they'll be able to prepared to sit for the first three exams. As you can see, they don't have anything in terms of the budget except there's a little bit of cost in the beginning. They have listed if the enrollment supported 5 years out that they would perhaps hire a non-tenure track faculty member. But as we're doing with most of the new programs, we don't book in any new faculty until the students are there and the tuition money will support the cost. So it's the kind of effort that we really like to see, three departments reaching across and collaborating with existing courses and bundling them in a new way that is more meaningful to students, and also the ability for them to offer a program that has immediate workforce implications. So with that, I would recommend that we approve this degree. If you have questions, I'm happy to respond.
Any questions? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion made and a second. Any comment? If not, we'll vote on the motion. Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden.
Yes?
Okay, committee votes in favor.
Now we'll turn to the vote by the board. You want to do the board vote now? Or you want to wait?
No, we should
Move
do it.
approval?
Yeah.
Second?
We have a motion made and a second by the board. Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Graham.
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes.
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunvold.
Yes.
Okay,
Motion
all votes
carried.
in favor.
Next item, Steve.
Awesome. Okay. This is a Master of Science, a degree in explosive technology. As we know, only in Rolla does this stuff happen, right? This is, once again, it's a very efficient use of their resources and faculty. They have an excellent program in explosives engineering, which has gotten some national reputation, and they've got quite a bit of what I'll say faculty horsepower and expertise there. What they do find, though, is that a number of students come to them that are bright folks from the Department of Defense or ATF, but they don't have the engineering background. And so they have provided in the past a certificate in explosive technology for them. But a lot of these are very career-oriented, very smart personnel. And so they want to be able to offer a master's degree for them that covers a lot of the same ground, but not exactly in the kind of engineering background. So once again, it's pretty much an existing program. They have the faculty. I think they plan to add one graduate student. This is interesting, believe it or not, even though it's explosive technology, it's a program that will be offered mostly online. I think there are only 3 courses that are required face-to-face. Keep in mind, too, that because of the nature of the professional development engineering, they'll be able to charge a high premium price for the program. I think it's somewhat like $1,000 an hour but of course it's covered through the companies that, so it probably will end up being a fairly decent money-making program, but also serve an important need. They have a lot of the security elements in place, and so they've done that with their engineering program. So once again, very good use of faculty, inventive use of a new program, and they'll be able to provide something that probably have a ready-made audience for the very first year. With that, I'll pause for a second in case you have questions.
Any questions of Dr. Graham? I might point out that when we adopt these new degrees, we actually are recommending they be approved by the Coordinating Board of Higher Education, just so everybody understands that. Is there a motion to approve this degree? Is there a second? Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden.
Yes.
Okay, all committee votes in favor.
Mr. Chairman, I now move that we recommend that the Master of Science in Explosive Technology be approved and recommended to the Board of Higher Education for their approval. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any questions, comment? If not, Cindy, would you call the roll on a vote?
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Graham,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes.
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunvold.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion
All votes in
carried.
favor.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
Dr. Graham.
Now, do I hear a motion that the Student and Academic Affairs Committee be adjourned? Is there a second? Second. Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips stepped out, Curator Snowden,
Yes?
all votes in favor.
Next, we'll turn to the Audit Committee, and I'll turn it over to Curator Farmer.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. The Audit Committee has one information item today. Michelle Perania, our Interim Chief Audit Executive, will review our internal audit for the quarter. As you know, the system is trying to drive efficiencies and streamline services across its campuses. In addition to the summary of our audit work completed, Michelle will discuss how current audit priorities are decided and how internal audit work is approaching its work to help facilitate these shared services. Michelle will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and I would like to welcome the new curators to the board. And for those of you who have seen presentation of audit before, specifically by me, this one has a different feel. We will first go through the audit work that has been completed since our June board meeting, and then we will move into the approach audit is taking and our thinking behind how we're approaching our work given all the changes that are occurring, and I hope that generates some discussion and even suggestions from the board. So since our last meeting, we've completed 4 internal audits, and the one audit I would highlight in that time period is the MU College of Arts and Sciences. This audit had a risk rating of 3, and all other audits that we completed were a 1 or a 2. We identified in this audit inconsistencies in policy related to faculty award programs between the system policy, the campus, and the college, which just made it a little unclear guidance about how these programs can be administered in the college. Also, one center within the college had been operating independently with little oversight or accountability to the college, and management is addressing these issues that were identified and have put some good action plans in place. We also completed follow-up for management action items that were due. We looked at 22 action items in 15 audits, and of this, 86% of the action items were completed. One action plan from the HIPAA Privacy Business Associate Agreements audit we gave a revised due date to. And this is because work has been completed in a number of areas, such as in the contracting system, so that we can connect the business associate agreement with the contract and we could generate the list of the business associate agreement. And a policy has been created overall for the health system about business associate agreements that the different departmental policies need to align with. But there still needs to be additional work to connect some of these pieces together, and some additional work in that we have the BAAs that we can pull out of the system that currently have been completed recently, but we still need to get the BAAs that were already in place connected into that. We are recommending 6 action plans from 2 audits that were completed in 2014 and 15 not be implemented. These audits related to benefits and also merit-based compensation, and they were audits completed for the entire system across all the campuses. And in this current time period, 2 of those action items were due. 4 are not yet to be due until 2018. So, and I did consult with HR leadership, and our thinking behind this is the administrative review that is currently underway includes the HR function, and new recommendations will come from that study. And we did not think it would be prudent to hold current leadership accountable to the action plans from audits conducted in 2014 and 15, because this may conflict with the direction now that current leadership would want to move for the system. So we're just making the recommendation that these audit plans that have not been implemented will not be implemented. So now I would like to move into how we think about our current audit priorities. And as you've heard already in the meeting, we're in a different type of environment. We really are driving streamlining of processes. We're trying to make things consistent where it makes sense that they be consistent, yet maintain distinctiveness. And for the purpose of finding resources internally that we can then reallocate to the strategic priorities of leadership and the board. So one of the important responsibilities that internal audit is to continuously reassess our risk and alignment of our audit priorities to be consistent with the management objectives and initiatives. This is how we can, as much as possible, place our audit resources in the area of most benefit. At this time, the administrative review is underway, and campuses are rethinking, and in some cases, restructuring to find the revenue internally to reallocate to their most important strategic initiatives. So we are currently managing 70 audits, and as we do our planning for these audits, we consider if it is the appropriate time for that audit based on the areas that are part of the review that's underway or any restructuring that's currently underway. Auditing in an area that's undergoing change is not helpful unless the audit is part of the pre-implementation assessment. And the reason is that we start generating findings and recommendations that also the restructuring is generating findings and recommendations, and it's just not helpful to anyone in the organization to be in that kind of position. So in this situation, it's too early to provide assurance that the processes, our outcomes, are working as management intends. That is why the finance, HR, IT, and operational areas that are part of the administrative review are a lower priority at this point in time as we consider the audits on the plan. We do still include and consider any compliance or regulatory related areas, in the reviews that would be outside the scope of the restructuring work. So just as an example of an audit that would be a lower priority at this point, we have on the plan audit at Missouri S&T College of Engineering and Computing, and it's a fiscal process review. So we're unlikely at this time to use our resources to perform that audit until intended changes have been implemented. So another factor that we use in prioritizing our work is providing independent assessments of areas that have been restructured. So if restructuring work is completed, it makes sense to go in and say, does the design of the changes that they made make sense? Is it reducing our risk in key areas? And we have put placeholders on the plan for these kind of audits. So that is part of the 70 that I referred to. And again, we do continue to focus on compliance areas within schools or across schools. We continue to focus on IT security. Any high-risk areas, athletic compliance is also on the plan for this year. So there are things that don't conflict with the restructuring work that is important to continue to look at. So some of the things over the past 2 years that we have learned, or trends that we've seen, that I believe help us in doing even better audit work, but it helps shape how we approach our work and the focus for the organization. Financial, as I referred to again, financial processes and HR processes are examples of this. One of the big areas is when we speak about financial processes, a lot of work is going on in cash management control and purchasing cards. And we're going to go into a little detail as an example of that in just a moment. So again, what we see is there are issues at the departmental levels of, it looks like they're out of compliance or they are out of compliance with policy. But a lot of times where we audited and found that, they can't solve it at that level. We need to take it to a higher level and solve it, and that's exactly what's being done with the whole work with purchasing cards and cash management. So that just gives you an example of how we're shifting how we do this work. And the other 2 points here about business processes related to administrative functions are decentralized and variable across schools and departments within schools. We do see how this results in duplication of infrastructure. This is the opportunity for streamlining that a lot of discussion has already gone on about. And we see this in lots of areas where we go in. We've pushed the responsibility down to the departmental level to do the work, and it's getting cost prohibitive to even have the expertise at that level. And we need to kind of flip that and say we need to have expertise at a higher level and to support the departments in the transactions of that work. And we've also seen in audits how confusion is created because we'll have a policy at the system level and the college will make a policy that kind of interprets that policy, and then the departments may make a policy that interprets that college policy. So this is, again, an opportunity to address and make it clearer for everybody in the organization so we can be streamlined and get the outcomes and results that we want. So that really has led us to focus on processes more than just departments and to look at them in their entirety, vertically and horizontally, and put less emphasis on administrative processes within the schools or the departments, again, with the exception of compliance or regulations or other audits such as that. An example of this is we currently have underway a system-wide review of how university bank accounts are opened and managed, and also searching for any bank accounts outside that process. And this also is part of the whole cash management look. So instead of going in and looking just again at a school to say, how do you manage your university bank accounts, we want to do it across the entire system. So let's move our discussion into the one card project in data analytics work that is currently underway. It's a collaborative effort. Management really started this whole process, and they're driving it. Internal audit is providing support with the data analytics piece. And it's an example of how we can work collaboratively to help drive some of this change. So almost 2 years ago, finance, supply chain, and accounts payable shared services began efforts to streamline purchasing cards and strengthen oversight by making the approval process electronic. This is the piece that's referred to as the One Card Reconciliation Project. And part of that is we went from a card for purchasing and a separate card for travel down to one card that can do both of those things. And we streamlined and reduced the cards by 22% within the organization in that effort. Moving to the electronic approval process will address issues that we have identified in audits, specifically items purchased with P cards that are prohibited and receipts not always reviewed and reconciled to statements. With electronic approval, the receipts will be in the system so that the reviewer or the approver can review those receipts for appropriate purchases, and they no longer have to request receipts be emailed to them. Through their data analytics projects, we determined that there's around 350,000 P-card transactions a year. So you can imagine it's hard to request 350,000 times to get receipts mailed to you. So by using our technology and putting it inside the system, this will make this a much better process. The data analytics project is a 2-year retrospective review of P-card purchases. The purpose of doing this work is twofold: raise awareness as to the personal responsibility for the use and approval of purchasing cards, and then to use this information to assess if the one card reconciliation process design does indeed reduce inappropriate use of purchasing cards, and for redesigning the back-end monitoring piece. So currently, to monitor this at a higher level, they select every 560th transaction or some number, and they just select that and look at it for appropriateness. Now we will be able to move to, here is a report of purchases that have a high potential of being inappropriate, and you could focus your attention on that, not all of the ones that were probably appropriate. So we will use what we learned from this project to redesign that back-end monitoring piece. We will use data analytics on that back-end monitoring piece. And this is important work because ensuring the appropriate use of cash and safeguarding it against theft is a cornerstone of our financial stewardship. And it not only reduces the likelihood of fraud, but also reputational risk, because as we know, if fraud does occur and it hits the newspapers, it becomes a reputational risk. So here's why I believe this approach helps the organization. Reallocating resources internally to invest strategically in the academic mission is a major priority of the leadership team and the governing board. So restructuring to improve the outcomes of administrative processes and ensuring that we have the subject matter expertise at the appropriate level to assist with this will result in savings to the organization. That is why the administrative review is important, and the type of audit that we recently completed with the HR processes for the MU School of Medicine, the type of audit we recently completed there, where we looked at those processes at the departmental level and worked again with management to say, how can we move this to a higher level and achieve these outcomes? Those kinds of things are very important in moving us into that direction. It's much better to use that approach than to, say, continually going into departments and trying to solve process issues at that level. And as the leadership team and the board continue to finalize our system goals and strategy, Internal audit can gauge alignment with this strategy for the areas that we are auditing. This becomes another piece of assurance for governance and leadership that the parts of the organization are indeed aligned with the whole and we're moving in the intended direction. So, in conclusion, as leadership continues to drive efficiencies and streamline services across campuses, aligning our internal audit work with overall priorities and continuing to do the basic audit work in risk areas such as compliance, fraud, security, will provide leadership and the board with objective assessments and assurances in key areas. And with that, I invite any questions about the audit work that was completed or the discussion around the approach to how we think through doing these audits or anything else. No questions?
I'll just say I think you're doing a great job, and I appreciate very much the presentation today.
Thank you.
Anything else from the committee?
Michelle, thank you so much. I hope the board can see a difference in this audit presentation versus the other ones that we've seen. We worked very hard to make sure that our internal audits are lining up with our bigger strategic initiatives, and I think Michelle's team is doing a great job of figuring out how to put in processes that should work across the whole system. So Michelle, thank you for that report. And with that, Chairman, that concludes the business of the Audit Committee.
Can you go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn your committee?
So moved.
And I'll entertain one to second it.
Just making sure there's no-
Julia, you're on. Second?
Julia, John's gone. It's John, two Johns, and
She's second.
I'll second.
I seconded
I
it.
think we made it.
I moved, she seconded. We're good.
you can call for a
Okay,
vote.
Cindy, sorry about that. Sorry, everybody, this is my first time. Cindy, can you please conduct a roll call?
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Sunvolt.
Yes.
Okay, you have all votes in favor.
Okay, next we'll turn to the Finance Committee report. Curator Steelman, I understand there's going to be a little bit of a change in order.
There
You can
is.
explain that to us?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we have 3 information items and 2 action items today, and we're going to take them out of order. And the first action item we're going to deal with will be the approval of the capital projects strategic evaluation study, which includes a change in the CRRs that we'll go into. Ryan will present the approval. I wanted to say a couple things, not simply because I'm enthralled with the sound of my own voice, but I think that this is a significant enough change that it deserves a little introduction and context. In my view, what we're doing here is a significant change in the culture of the board. And it is a change where the board, and it's a culture that I hope goes on far after I leave, where the board is asserting that it will no longer be reactive, that it will no longer be rubber stamps, that it will be proactive, and that it will assert its role in making strategic decisions. The second big cultural change I think this makes is a cultural change in the university as a whole. We have these discussions on systemness, a word that everybody knows I hate, but there have been times since I've been on the board where the actions of the president and general officers and curators have almost been viewed as advisory rather than the fiduciary obligations we have. This change will also make it possible for the board, the president, and the other general officers to really drive change down through the campuses, because nothing drives strategy anymore, in my mind, than capital improvements and the decision to allocate resources to important capital. And these decisions will now involve the board being involved early and making decisions. It will also, a big change, instead of having mass approvals and simply throwing things at the wall, the board will be setting priorities, and it won't be a 50-50 for each campus or a project for each campus. It will be a true setting of priorities for the university as a whole, and that will govern not just our relationships with the legislature, but with donors, with development, and it really, I think, is the most significant process and cultural change that I've seen since I've been on the board. I do want to say thanks. Ryan Rapp and Rick Banyek and Beth Asbury put in hundreds of hours into this. And I think each of you know because they've met with each of you, taken ideas from each of you. And it has really showed the best of the operations of some of our employees. And it is not simply based on ideas from around university institutions, but a lot of private enterprise was brought into this, particularly through Rick, but Ryan too. Two process things real quick to make it clear. If the board approves this today, it will go into effect immediately. And that means that projects that have already been approved, the greenhouse is an example, the music building at Columbia is an example, will continue on as are, and they will not become part of this process. If they haven't been approved, they'll become part of this process. Now, there'll be a transition period, so for some of these, and the UMKC Conservatory is the most obvious one, if a project comes to us, we will try to work on that transition, and it won't go through the entire 5-year process, but it will be sped up if the board sees fit. That'll be the transition period. And that'll take some flexibility and some forbearance by the board. Now, one last thing on how this is going to operate. This involves one more regular meeting of the board. It'll be a finance committee, but will function as we always do with all curators involved. The timeline in the approval is for October. This year, we know we're getting started late, and with everybody's busy schedules, we may move that into November. All board members will be contacted. We'll try to do it at a time when board members can be available, because I wanted to say one last thing. With the board approving this, and the board will be taking more responsibility, it will also put an obligation on board members who want to be involved in the prioritization process to make these additional meetings. So it will involve more responsibility from board members and more work. But again, you'll hear it from Ryan. In my opinion, this is a real step forward on how we manage, drive change, drive strategy. So,
Mr. Chairman, could I ask one question? Now, with your explanation, you think Ryan needs to really say anything?
yeah, because I didn't say anything.
We always like to hear from Ryan.
Always good to hear from the authority. Anyway, with that, and I know that went on, but I think this is significant. Ryan put in, and Rick put in hundreds of hours into this work.
Well, thank you, Curator Steelman. I'd also thank all the members of the board for their participation in this process. Gary Ward and others that maybe weren't directly involved in the study, but we've definitely been in touch with a lot of people as we move through this. And I think I agree with everything Curator Steelman said. As we're going to discuss and we're going to show, our investments in our facilities really have not been adequate over the last 15 years. And they could also be prioritized better than they have been. And I think this new process is critical to changing that. Before we get into it, David touched on it some, but the basis for our recommendations was really driven by the AGB best practices, which was included in the mailing materials, reviewing what other colleges and universities do, and then also thinking what outside industry does as it thinks about capital. So I did just want to offer that as that's really what framed the recommendations. The first couple of slides are really the punchline, and then we'll get into the details of what we're actually proposing. This first chart just shows the current process. And as you can see, the board, where board involvement is in the red box, and it shows that the board was only involved at the very end of the approval process. As we'll get into a little more depth of this, but given the strategic and long-term nature of our capital assets, we know this needs to change. So if you look at this chart, this is just a high level of what the new process would look like if it was approved by the board. And you can see the green boxes are showing you where board involvement would be. We'd have new board involvement. It shows that the board would be much more involved, play a strategic role in capital planning. And then if you flip over to the next chart, this is a summary of really what we're proposing. And it's just getting into translating what you saw in the previous chart and is the recommendation of the group. The key changes are that we would recommend that we move to a 5-year prioritized rolling capital plan. I think the next key item that really is critical is we're adding a gated approach for board approval. In italics, I just want to note that gate A, B, and D are all new. So in the past, really the only gate that the board was involved in was, if you go back to the beginning chart, was just project approval. With this approach, the board would participate in reviewing the preliminary capital plans in the fall. Then they'd actually approve the capital plan in the spring for the next 5 years, and then each project would come forward to the board for approval. But I think by the time you get to gate C, the board's going to have a good understanding of what those priorities are. They're going to have input into that, and then we'd also have an in-process review as it relates to projects. And I think Curator Steelman touched on it. With this transition, any project that already has received project approval by the board wouldn't be subject to this. For any projects that are contemplated in FY18, we'd propose just kind of a transition process where they would go through gate A, but if they made it through gate A, they'd go directly to gate C, that we wouldn't work them in to the capital plan. For projects in 2019 to 2023, they'd go through the full process. So I did just want to be clear on that. The other thing is establishing a clear delegation authority for approval of capital projects, and I'll touch on how we want to change that to not only be for operational approval of the project, but financial or signatory authority over establishment of these plans. So if we kind of dig into this a little deeper, and I welcome any questions you have as I go through these slides. This is the slide that just says, why would we want to change the approach? I think there's a number of reasons. One is best. It's a best practice, I think, to have the board more involved in this process. I say that for a number of reasons. One is the long-term impact of our capital decisions. When we choose to build a building, many times we're committing to a 50-plus year commitment. It's not only just building the building, but actually maintaining that building and running the building over the life of it. So there's a long-term nature to these decisions that actually outlives current board members, outlives current leadership. It also helps ensure that we're, to the point earlier, that it's the best use of capital money for the university. So where are we getting the best return for the resources we have? The other thing we've thought about too is when we think about our balance sheet, and you'll see later today, our balance sheet is primarily comprised of capital assets, investment, and debt. When we think about investments and debt, the board has a significant oversight role to play in that. So I think traditionally when you think of a board, boards will typically have more oversight of the balance sheet. And part of that's the balance sheet's the long-term component of your financials. The income statement is probably something more that day-to-day management is going to have oversight of. So that was one of the things we thought about as well. And I think the other thing is it's not just about building new buildings. We've talked about our facilities needs being $1.6 billion. I think the board has a key role to play in ensuring there is an balance in how we fund and invest in our capital needs. My point being is that we have significant needs that we have to balance with the need for new construction, but also maintaining what we have. And we've talked about this a lot in the past, but I think one of the things the board should be asking us is, how are you balancing the needs for new buildings versus taking care of what we have? So again, it's not just about the board approving individual projects, but also holding us accountable to ensure that we're good stewards of what we already have. So I think not only should the board be looking at individual projects, but also looking at our total capital spend and the areas that spends in. You've seen this chart before. It just highlights the current needs we have with our buildings, and I also think it drives home the point that I said earlier. We haven't been investing in our facilities over the last 15 years appropriately, and we can do a better job of prioritizing that going forward. This slide, I think it ties in really nicely with a lot of the discussion that we've already had today, and it's really looking at what does this look like. And I think the key takeaway is that in moving to this process, you really are moving towards an integrated approach where it's the strategy is driving our financial plan, which is then driving a capital plan, which is then informing a fundraising plan. And I think what this does is it ensures there's a connection between your strategy and your key capital investments. I think without this, you run the risk of having the inverse of that happening. Of it could be fundraising is informing what you need in terms of capital, or capital somehow driving the financial plan. This approach really would directly tie it into saying what is the strategy, what's the financial plan, and then what's then driving down into what our capital plan would be. And I think then it helps inform what our fundraising needs would be, and who do we need to talk to, who do we need to work with. Is it donors, is it industry partners, is it the legislature? So I think this is a really critical slide to understand, as I think it's a significant change. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but just how we would do it. We are proposing a change to the delegations of authority, and really trying to introduce let me go to how first. Trying to introduce the concept of operational and financial or signatory approval for capital projects. The point being that operational leadership, the president, the chancellors, the provost, they would determine the requirements and needs for whatever capital projects we're proposing. But I think there also has to be another check that says, from a finance point of view, is it feasible? Do we have the resources? Can it fit in the financial plan that we have? It doesn't mean if the answer to that's no, you say we're not going to do the project. But I think it's key that before we bring this forward to the board, there needs to be agreement in both of these areas. There needs to be agreement from the operational standpoint that this fits with our needs and our strategy, and that financially we're saying it fits within the financial resources and plan we have. This is just digging into the delegation authority a little further, and it contains the recommended delegations for new construction and renovation and infrastructure projects. I do want to highlight the one component that I don't have reflected on this chart is there'd also be just total capital spend that we'd include, and we'd expect the board to approve that as well. And I think that's what, if you're wondering, well, if a project falls below this threshold, how do I get visibility into that? Well, we have to present to you in total for each of these categories what we'd plan to spend in those years as well. So I think if there were questions about projects that fall below those thresholds, we're also going to be asking the board to approve the total amount. And that's why I said earlier, I think it's really important for the board to take a step back and not just always look at individual projects, but look at it holistically. And the chart on the right, I think, highlights that, drives that point home. So the blue line represents, if we just kept doing what we've been doing, what we'd spend in terms of capital expenditures on maintenance and repair. The red line represents, if we were to meet our targets, what we would be spending. I think those are things the board should be looking at. We should be talking to the board about that holistically, not just on an individual project by project basis.
Ryan, if I could just interject too, because we had this discussion, these amounts for authority are suggestions that are being made to the board, and that if any member of the board has different views on those amounts, this is the time to have that discussion. We also made a decision to make the authority on renovation infrastructure higher than new construction, because it was our thought that we needed to start pushing a little bit, or I don't want to say pushing, making it easier to perform much needed renovations and infrastructure repairs than new capital, because we have to maintain what we have, whereas we don't always have to build new capital. But that is advisory to be discussed today.
Correct. I think what we were hoping, and that's one of the reasons we don't actually have the collected rule changes, if we got agreement from the board on what they'd like to see, we would come back then to the December meeting with the actual collected rule changes to present.
And Ryan, what are the thresholds now that the rules
Yeah.
bylaws allow, or require board approval? Can you
$5 million is the current threshold for any capital project. If it is a debt-financed project, all project, no matter what the size is currently in the rules, it has to be approved. So really, what we're seeking, two things that would be different here. One is we're asking for, if it's a renovation and infrastructure project to take care of what we already have, could we up that threshold? The other component that we're changing is asking the board to actually approve the total capital expenditure budget year by year. And I think that's the piece that I really do think is important, because it causes us to step back and think about these things holistically, not just on a project-by-project basis.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, so we're being asked to approve the levels on the left-hand side, not the 10-year projection.
Correct. I've got the 10-year projection because I wanted to make the point that it's important that we look at the total capital spend, not just individual projects.
Right, because we wouldn't, at least most of us wouldn't have the information to talk about a 10-year projection. The second question is, projects that have multi-phases, like one of them that's covered here is the new music school construction at the Columbia campus, and that's actually in 3 phases. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at phase 1. There's also phase 2 that is captured in terms of the square footage, but not the dollars. And then there's phase 3, which is some sort of a 500-seat amphitheater where we don't have much information. So when we're talking about establishing a new plan, are those triggers based on phases or based on the entire project?
You would layer it in the phases, so each phase would have to go into the plan. We know year 1 of, and keep in mind this is a rolling plan, we know year 1 of the plan will be more defined than year 5. But we hope as we pick up, and I think we'll learn as we go through this first year, but we hope as this works, I think the board should ask questions if a project just shows up on the 5-year plan. If it had never been on the plan and next year we're saying we want to do this project and it wasn't on the 5-year plan, it's not to say we wouldn't do it, but just ask the question of, well, we thought we had the plan last year, what was it that drove that change? And again, there could be a perfectly good reason, but I think that's what we're trying to say is you can actually look at years 2 through 5 and have an idea of what these capital projects are.
I actually think, John, that you just made a very good point that had totally escaped me. We don't want to get into a circumstance where the $5 million can be avoided by phasing it in 2 million, 2 million, 2 million.
Right.
So if it would be the board's consensus, and if you would agree, Ryan, I think that we should write the CRR to make clear that it is either a phase or total. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Does anybody disagree with that?
Makes sense.
Then a question I had, just in terms of coming up with the threshold amounts for board approval or, any of the delegation of authority limits, were you taking them from the current limits and/or did you do any benchmarking against how
Yeah.
others? I mean, typically it would be a percentage of the overall operating
Good.
income or something like that that would trigger a
Yeah.
level up.
Good question. We did. We looked at where we're at. We looked at where others were. I don't think we were outside of it. We also looked at, well, if we leave it at $5 million, how much of this are we capturing? And we're capturing over 90%. So it's not like there's a whole lot that's flying under the radar screen. I think, and the board would still have visibility to that if that were to happen. So the way this would be presented, you would be looking at, here's the projects, new projects over $5 million for a given year. Here's the renovation projects over $8 million, and then here's the total budget. And if you, for some reason, look at the total budget and say, well, the projects that we're looking at are only 50%. What are you doing? I mean, I think that's another check to make sure that there's not a lot of, to Curator Phillips's point, there's not a lot of projects flying under the radar screen. Any other questions? Discussion. Just the last 2 charts I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. I know they're small font. This was just to provide the board with a more detailed view of how the process would work. I did want to highlight one thing. If you think about the May and June and July points we have on here, we know this will be a continuous kind of rolling process. But I do want to note that it doesn't really end with approval of the 5-year plan in April. One of the things is once it was approved, then we'd actually come back to the board in July with our communications plans on how we're going to go who we're going to go talk to, what we're going to do, and how we're going to try to market these projects as well. That concludes the presentation. I'd welcome any questions or discussion the board might have.
Any questions, discussion, modifications?
I do have one question, but I don't have the page number. I guess it is here. 224. Actually, you don't have to flip it back up. It talked about the operational leadership, and it references the chancellor, the provost will determine the requirements. I don't see a point in here where the system has oversight of the chancellor on these capital expenditure issues.
So you've got, this is just a summary slide. If you go to 2-26, you can see the system, CFO, and president will evaluate the plan. So it's in there.
Thanks.
Yep.
I don't think you're in here yet, but we talked a little about part of the obvious purpose of this is to have the system board president driving the strategic change.
Right. I just didn't see it on that slide when I was walking in.
Ryan, quick question on the process timeline. So we got September there. Curators approved the new capital planning process. Will there be is that a deadline whereby we start receiving in applications for these capital projects? And is that a hard deadline? I mean, if someone wants to submit one after a certain date, are we going to allow it? I mean, how
No, I think we do have if you go back to this slide, if there is mid-year deviations from the plan, so if something came up, again, you can see we're actually recommending that be a much lower threshold. And that's where we would hope there would be some discussion. So, but you need to get it into this process. What we'll do is, if this is approved, is we'll work with the campuses to prepare the materials for this meeting. It's probably going to be late October, early November. And I think we included a summary sheet, that would be going to be a one-page sheet on each project, and it would be presented at that meeting in terms of what the priorities are, and it would allow the board to have an understanding and give feedback on those projects.
Have we thought about the situations where you have a donor that's writing a big check, they want this kind of a project, this is what they want done? How has the board dealt with that in the past, and what do we plan on doing I know it's a touchy subject. Yeah.
No, I actually think, so I'll go back to this slide, and I think that's a really good question. We know that fundraising and donor relations take a long time to build, but I think with this change, as you can see, fundraising will be driven by approved projects. The expectation would be, if we're working on those things, we ought to be talking to the board about these as capital projects and why they fit with our strategy. I think if you don't approach it that way, the risk you run is I think you could find individuals that would say, well, if they want to pay for the building, great, let's let them pay for the building. Well, the problem is the initial cost of the building isn't really where our cost is. The cost is in the ongoing upkeep of the building. And so if we happen to build a building that, while someone gave us the money to do it and it didn't fit with our strategy, it's actually going to be pulling financial resources out of strategic initiatives to continue to operate that building. So with this change, I think there would be an expectation that this would inform the fundraising plans. But I think we also understand that many times developing relationships with large donors, that's probably even a longer process than the 5-year process. That could take sometimes a decade or longer.
If I could add just a little more of a politically incorrect way, the difference is that there would be end runs around the board's strategic prerogatives because of donors. Now, obviously, we still want to collaborate with donors. We still want to collaborate with the legislature, but it will be the president, the CFO, and the board making the decisions on strategy, not donors, not the legislature.
All right.
Looks like that fourth bullet point is designed to address some of those issues.
Yeah.
But obviously, we have to be sensitive to all of those.
That's right.
Constituencies.
And I think we have to be sensitive, but I also think what we're really moving towards now is saying the strategy is going to drive what we need in terms of capital, and that's really going to inform what we want people to go fundraise for.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments? Any modifications?
I just want to say a good job. That represents a lot of work.
Yeah.
Excellent work.
Well, I talked to Ryan. I hate to ask so many questions here, but when I did talk to Ryan about this process, I think along with our capital projects that are proposed, I think we need to have a teardown proposals as well. We just can't keep adding space on campuses, because then we're more in the red there on your previous slide as far as upkeep and maintenance on old space that is just sitting there, and then we need renovations for space we're not using. So I would love to see, as we're evaluating capital projects, along with that, we need to see tear down projects as well, eliminating space.
Correct, and I think with every project proposal we bring you, we're going to be talking about, if we're building this space, here's space we're going to take offline, and if you don't see it in there, I think you ought to ask us the question is why we're not.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Everybody agreed to the delegation numbers as they appeared in the slide? Okay. If there's no more discussion, I'd like to ask for a motion, and again, in making this motion, remind everybody that October, but probably November this year, we will implement this, and I expect there are some major projects that are teed up to come before the board. So Cindy and Ryan, Memory, everybody, we're going to have to try to work with a lot of schedules. And the second thing is that when we make this motion, and the motion I asked for today is we will come back, because we anticipated some more change, we will come back with a collected rule and regulation that sets out the discussion today, and past that, hopefully in the December meeting, Mr. Chairman, but we're going to go forward with this as if this is our process immediately. Any questions on that?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So we've had a motion. Any second from the committee?
I'll second that.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second from the committee that we approve the capital planning process, that the existing capital planning process be replaced with the capital planning process as presented today by Ryan, beginning with fiscal year 2019 planning process, and remember the transition period for 2018. Cindy, call the roll, please.
Curator Burnsick?
Yes.
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Curator Sunvolt?
Yes.
Okay, all committee votes in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the existing capital planning process will be replaced with the capital planning process as presented to you today, beginning with fiscal year 2019 planning process with the specifically mentioned transition for fiscal year 2018.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? I had one question. When adopted, would that have a designated effective date, or would the effective date be the date of adoption?
The effective date will be today upon adoption, with the understanding, and again, I don't know if John was back here, but I know you're interested in this, because particular for something like the UMKC Conservatory, it will not be required to go through every gate.
That was my understanding.
Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Burnsick?
Yes.
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Curator Sunvolt?
Yes.
Okay, all votes in favor.
Okay, now we're going to move on to some other things. And again, I want to say how much I appreciate, is Rick here, by the way?
Yeah, Rick, and
Rick,
Beth
would
are
you
here.
stand up? Has everybody met Rick? I don't even know if all the board. Everybody's met Rick. Yeah, Rick put in hundreds of hours on this too, as did Beth Asbury. Okay, now we're going to get to the old way of doing things, but pretty quickly. Vice President Ryan Rapp will review the project design for Phase 1 of the MU School of Music.
Thank you, Curator Steelman. I won't spend a lot of time on this. The information on the design was included in your mailing materials. It was approved for construction in December of 2016 by the board with a total budget of $24 million. $16 million of that was from gifts, with the campus funding the rest. The other thing I want to note is the project will allow for 2 older buildings on the campus to be torn down. So Curator Chapman, to your point earlier, with this, we are taking some old buildings offline. And under our collected rules, we're required to provide the board with a design update. The pictures and design are included in the materials, but I'd welcome any questions the board might have regarding the design.
Any questions?
This is the one where we're doing this by phase, right?
Correct.
Right. So, and we don't really, and I trust these are all kind of standalones, so this is going to be valuable even if we're delayed in getting to phase 2 or phase 3.
And again, you bring up a great question that I had not anticipated, but I would assume that additional phases will have to go through the new process.
Correct. Yes. And I think I'm looking at Vice Chancellor Gary Ward, but I know when we look at phases, typically if we bring a phased project forward, we're thinking about we might get to phase 2 or phase 3, but the building, whatever we're building in that first phase, could stand alone and operate without the addition of the other phases.
And I don't raise that because I'm opposing phase 2 and 3. I think it's important to have a really good school of music on the Columbia campus, and also a good school of music on the St. Louis campus. It is an economic driver in Missouri, both in terms of K-12 education as well as other aspects of the entertainment industry. So, but do it a step at a time, and I think this is a great way to do it.
Any other questions or comments on the, this is just an information item. There'll be no action taken today.
Just curious, how your 16 million in gifts, was that strategically focused on the music building, or what is
Yeah.
it?
Yep.
Anything else? Okay, then we're going to move on to second information item. Brian Rapp will now review the fiscal year 2017 financial status report.
Thank you, Curator Steelman. We're in the process of currently finalizing our FY17 financial statement audit with BKD. We should have our financial report issued sometime in early October. BKD will actually review the results of their financial statement audit with the board in December, but I did want to review, we're far enough along in that process that typically at this meeting we've reviewed our financials for the year ended June 30, 2017. So a couple of things that I just want to highlight. When we think about our balance sheet or our statement of net position, when I'm talking in governmental accounting terms, the university remains well positioned. We're in a strong position to manage through periods of financial uncertainty, and that's largely supported by the overall size and diversity of our operations, and really does help us to weather any one significant event. That being said, when we think about our balance sheet, we do still face some growing liabilities, especially related to benefits and retirement. We'll discuss that more on some subsequent slides. I think we've continued to manage these liabilities to sustainable levels, but they continue to place pressure on our operating budget. From an income statement perspective, or as it's called in the governmental accounting world, the statement of change in net position, we continue to show positive operating results. We have seen slower operating revenue growth, and that is putting pressure on us to manage our expenses. But even with the revenue pressures we faced this year, we were able to manage our operating expenses in line with revenues. And I think one of the things you'll see later is this really points to a key advantage of scale for us in diversity of our operations. For the first part of the presentation, I will focus on our balance sheet. On the left here, you can see this is our assets. They're resources that are held by the university, expected to benefit the institution in the future. As you look at this pie chart, you can see that as I said earlier, 90% of our assets are comprised of either investments or capital assets. It is important, though, for the university to maintain sufficient levels of working capital to fund the cash needs of the institution. When you think about it, we're a $3.2 billion a year operations, and it's especially important in times of challenging financial times. As a research institution with the healthcare system, Working capital is absolutely necessary to deal with operating volatility. When we move over to the right and we start to think about liabilities, those are claims against those assets. The biggest liabilities that we have are the university's bonds and commercial paper that's outstanding at $1.7 billion. The next largest liability is represented largely of our net pension liability related to our retirement plan. We also have liability related to retiree medical. That totals almost $736 million. And then if we think about net position, that translates, when I take the difference of assets minus liabilities, that translates into a net position of $4.7 million. And we'll get into, or $4.7 billion. I'll get into what that's comprised of in a couple of slides. But net position is the equivalent of equity in a for-profit setting. So when you're thinking about what am I talking about when I say net position, it's equity. As we start to think about our capital assets and the asset side of our balance sheet, we have seen growth in our capital assets moderate. Some of that's been driven by the fact that we've also seen our revenues moderate. And I think we've also slowed down our issuance of debt. And some of that debt was largely driven by significant needs for infrastructure growth related to enrollment. But I think even as we look forward and think about an outlook of slower revenue growth, it's still important for us to invest in areas that will serve as future growth engines, which not only include our new buildings, but as I said earlier, maintaining what we have. We've already touched on that some today. I think I do want to take some, as we shift to the liability side of our balance sheet, I want to take a little time with this slide because I think it's important as we think about our pension plan. Relatively speaking, our pension plan is well funded. Using a 7.75% discount rate as of June 30, it was 87% funded. But it still represents a significant risk for us. And part of what I want to highlight is under governmental accounting standards, the liability is discounted at the assumed rate of return. This is a significant difference from how the private sector looks at this liability, and they discount it at a debt discount rate. We know that the rating agencies tend to look at it more from a private accounting approach when they think about our pension liabilities. And in doing so, they estimate our pension liability to be closer to $2 billion. It's priced into our credit, but they do think about this. I know Tom's going to talk about the assets in our pension portfolio later today, but I just want to highlight on this slide, even just a 1% swing in our assumed rate of return, what it does. So if we were to move the investment rate return assumption from 7.75% to 6.75%, it doubles the liability. So it's, for every 1%, that's an additional $500 million. So I think it's really important, while it is relatively well funded, I think we just need to be aware of a lot of that's also driven by the return rate that we're thinking of when we look at this. So while it is relatively well funded, it's still a challenge that we have to think about as we move forward. The other large liability, and there is a typo on the slide, it should say FY18. This is an accounting change that takes place in FY18. The change is already factored in to the credit rating. They won't be looking at this and going, well, this is something new. They've already looked at this. But it will add approximately $275 million in additional liabilities to our balance sheet. I do want to highlight, though, had the board not taken the action they took last year, this would have actually been $200 million higher. And I think that's important to understand. So rather than adding a $275 million liability, we'd be adding a $475 million liability related to retiree medical. In addition to that, the annual cost of the old plan was $60 million per year, and that's now dropped to less than $30 million per year. So I just want to highlight this is one place that we've taken action. I think we've been very proactive in looking at this and managing this, and it was something that was highlighted by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's when they visited us this year. We talked about moderation in growth in capital assets. We've also seen moderation in growth of our debt. And that's largely just driven by the fact we haven't had any large debt issuances, and we've been paying down our prior issues. But as you can see, we had pretty significant growth in our debt from 2007 to 2011. But that was in large part to needs we had in a favorable interest rate environment. The earliest that we'd probably contemplate issuing any additional debt would be in the upcoming spring, but it would really depend on the market conditions that we see. When we think about net position, or as I said earlier, equity, the last part of our balance sheet, it really is a measure of our institutional wealth. In the governmental accounting world, they break it down into 4 groups. Permanently restricted net position or equity, which is largely our endowments. So while our endowments are great, we can't actually touch the endowments for operational needs. Then another large part of our net position is invested in capital assets, net of related debt. So these are illiquid buildings that we have. The restricted expendable is gifts and grants that we have for specific purposes. And then the largest, the most flexible component of this we have is unrestricted net position. On the next chart, I'll go through the breakdown of that. As I previously said,
Is the restricted expendable going up or going down?
so if you look at the yellow.
Okay, here it is, yeah.
Yeah, so you can kind of see how we've moved over time. The unrestricted in the green, the drop that you see in 2013 to 2014 was related to when we had to put the pension liability on our balance sheet. Prior to that, it was just a footnote disclosure. So you can see this is the first year that our net position has climbed back to the position it was prior to that. And also when we think about the $4 billion in net position that we have, or over 4.5, if you look at that, most of that is tied up in our endowment or in capital assets. But this gives you an idea of what the trends you've seen over time. And I think for us, what we really focus on is maintaining a healthy, unrestricted net position. That's really important to us. It's important to the rating agencies as well. So as we move from the balance sheet to the income statement, this is a snapshot of our performance. There's more detail in your mailing materials. Overall, our annual performance was in line with the prior year, as you can see when we look at our operating income. We did have a slight decline. Our margin did erode slightly. As you can see, we went from operating income of $139 million to $125. We do present this differently than governmental accounting standards require us to present. So under governmental accounting standards, they would include things like state appropriations, the investment income distribution for endowments as part of your non-operating income. We include it within the operating income. What we're really trying to get to with the operating income number is what are the things that are within the control of management versus what are things that aren't. So investment income is in your non-operating. We have interest expense down there as well. The one thing I'd note, and we'll talk more about it on the next slide, is MU Healthcare. When we look at the $125 million, they contributed significantly to our positive operating margin. Of that 125, $101 million of that came from MU Healthcare. So as I was just saying, their performance was very strong. As you can see, this just breaks this year's performance out between healthcare and the rest of the university. They had a 10.7% margin at $101 million, whereas when you look at the rest of the university, our performance was basically break even. When you think about $24 million in operating income on $2.2 billion, you're basically looking at break even performance. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges as we move forward is how do we increase that margin? Not so we can pay dividends to shareholders, but so how we can make investments in the things that we know we need to do for the university. So anyone that tells you margin doesn't matter, margin absolutely matters for us, just like it does any organization. I'll just kind of recap when we think about the year, what were the positives. We know our healthcare growth has been positive for us. We did see growth in our grants and contracts. We were up over $10 million, or a 3.5% increase over the last year. We were able to manage expenses within our revenue, which I think was positive given some of the negatives I'll highlight here in a minute. The other thing is we saw really strong investment performance. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because Tom's going to go through it with you guys later today, but we had a really good year when it related to investments. But I think that's a volatile source of revenue for us, so when we sit here and think about it, it's not something we say, well, we're going to be able to rely on that year over year. Some of the challenges that we've seen is, I've already talked about, we've got continued pressure on our benefit liability growth. We've also seen a decline in our academically driven revenue. Tuition and state appropriations were down by $27 million and $20 million respectively. We'll talk about this a little more as we go through the presentation. I did just want to provide this chart because I think this is a real financial strength for us. It shows that we have a very diverse source of operating revenues. And so anytime we have a challenge in one area of the institution, we are able to have that's offset by others. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can let the problem continue on into perpetuity, but it does give us some flexibility in how we respond to the challenges that we face versus all of our revenue coming in from any one single source. I won't spend a lot of time here, but as we now move away from the income statement and just think about some key metrics that we know our bondholders and the rating agencies look at, we think about some of our key ratios. I won't go through each one of them. We also then think of a composite financial index, which was a nice way to take these four ratios and put it into one number. What you really want to be in terms of your CFI is at a 3 or above. As you can see, we're at a 3.21. So we continue to be a healthy institution financially when we think about where we ended in FY17. I do just, though, on the next slide want to show investment performance was a primary driver in the improvement of those ratios that you saw on the slide before. So if you look at this slide and you say, well, what drove our primary reserve ratio up? What drove our return on net position up? And what drove available resources to debt up? This slide just shows if you were to factor in zero investment returns, we basically would have looked the same as we did last year. But it's giving you an idea of how much investment returns can move that. And I just want everyone to understand that, because for as good of a year we had this year, while I can't predict the future, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have that same year next year. So it does have a significant impact on those ratios. I think, so far what we've kind of looked at is past performance, and it has been strong. But we also have to look forward and think about what are the key drivers over the next 5 years. And I think that's really important that we do this, and I know Chancellor Bickelmeyer touched on it earlier, and I do agree with her. I think we're in this mode of, we're not sitting here saying we're waiting on the state or waiting on someone. I think we want to be leading, and we're going to look internally and do what we need to do to be the university we want to be. And when we think about what are these key financial drivers that we're trying to think about as we try to put together a 5-year financial plan, is we know that state support is most likely going to be flat to declining. There's limits on how much we can increase tuition, and I clearly put market forces on here because I'm not talking about limits from the law. I'm just saying there's going to be price competition in higher education, and so I think maybe for some of our high-cost, high-demand programs, there's the ability to increase tuition, but do we see broad-based tuition increases? No, we don't. The other thing is we know there's going to continue to be enrollment pressure. There's going to continue to be more competition for students. Some of the positives we know is through the administrative streamlining work we do, we expect to see that cost curve start to bend. We also know that we have to think about increased productivity. So those are some of the positives. Then we think about some of the investments we know we're going to have to make. So we've got to think about how do we invest in faculty and staff salaries, how do we make investments in scholarships, and how do we make investments in research. We're not going to be going through it in this meeting, but as we start to think about planning for the next year, I'll talk a little bit more about where I want us to go in a couple of slides. But I also want to highlight, and this was a quote from the most recent Moody's rating report, our rating agencies and investors recognize these facts as well. I think they see that there's significant revenue pressure. They're giving us credit for that we've shown the ability in the past to adjust. But I think they know that execution risk is going to be something they're going to be closely focused on, and we're going to be closely focused on as we move forward. And that no one solution is available. And I think, it's not a matter of just cutting our way there. There's going to have to be a multitude of solutions. I want to share is Jeff Salingo is a writer on higher education, and I think he has a good quote that is out there that I think fits with where we're at. He said more has been a guiding principle at institutions, and he means more dorms, more tuition, more majors, more centers, more students. I think we have to think about how do we change business as usual and have a more disciplined approach about choosing what we will and won't invest in. So I think that is a very different approach, and I thought with what he said there, I think that's very fitting for where we're at as an organization. I think I talked a little bit about the 5-year financial plan. We've been executing on an annual budget for the past decade, and the results really have been that we look at cutting on an annual basis, and then we repeat the same exercise every spring. And I think Barb touched on that earlier today. As we've noted in some of the previous slides, we need to think about a longer planning cycle and really think about how do we drive improvement from a continuous improvement standpoint. And I think that's the one thing, I know when we laid out the 2008 budget planning process and that came out, one of the things that we were trying to be very clear about is this is a continuous process. So there is no end to it. It's, I think, continually, how can we continue to be more efficient and productive? I also want to highlight that we've remained committed to executing on the budget plans that were submitted in June of 2018. And each campus has their own plan, but I think there's 4 kind of broad themes in those plans. One of them is related to academic excellence, academic program review. I kind of summarize that in terms of mission, market, margin, and that's something we've learned from UMKC. And when you think about that, it's asking yourself the question of, do these programs fit with the mission? Is there a market for those programs, and are they providing a margin? I think the answer on the last part, it doesn't have to be yes. But when we roll all the programs together, when we look at the balance of programs, is there a margin? I know I'll attribute this to Rick, because Rick Baniak from UMSL, I like it. I know we've had questions of, well, does that mean if there's not a margin, we're not going to have that program? The answer is no. If you're in a program that's losing money, we need you to lose less. And if you're in a program that's making money, we need you to make more. So I don't want people to get the idea of, well, if I don't have a margin for a specific academic program, that it necessarily means we're not going to support the program. But we do have to, as I said previously, we have to have a margin overall as an institution, or we're not going to be able to make the investments that we need.
Brian, could I ask you, interrupt here, because we've heard a lot over the last, today, but over the last months about our need to improve our faculty salaries, particularly in some of the high demand areas and some of the research areas, to get the really great people into the state of Missouri. Would you talk about how or the challenges that you face in trying to implement a long-term plan and the changes that you anticipate trying to make over the course of the next year or 2 years or 3 years to make that a financial reality? How what you're doing actually does affect faculty and can increase faculty salaries?
Well, and I think that's, I think when you think about these 4 broad categories, if we can move the needle on all of those, that is how we're going to be able to address faculty salaries. Because I talked about some of the long-term challenges we face, and I can tell you the forward academic model, if we kind of just did nothing and we run it forward, and we think about where does that put us over the next 5 years, and we're going to get more granularity on this, but there's a $150 to $200 million recurring gap when you think about that. And so if we're willing to think about academic programs differently, also what revenue growth opportunities are out there, and if we can find those, that provides some of the funding needed. But I think more importantly are the last 2. What are the things that we can drive out from the administration side? And if we can find cost savings in terms of administrative processes, if we can utilize our assets better, that's where we're going to be able to find some of these things that allow us to push money back into the academic core. And I think that's with discussions with President Choi and other leaders, I think that's the underlying goal here is how do we execute on these things that allow us to drive money into the academic core.
And this seems obvious, but I'm saying it for a reason, and not necessarily for the board, but for some of the other people here. These exercises in cutting are not simply because we want to be less, but much of this cutting is because we do recognize the importance of our faculty and the need to get their pay up to par with the great institutions.
Well, and I think that's when we think about it, where are we going to get the funding to do those things? When we think about it, I could sit up here and tell you where we're going to go get more money from the state. We're going to increase tuition to do that. I go back to, I think we talked about it at the board retreat. It was in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I think I commented that I was surprised it was only 57 or 60% of university CFOs said that their new investments were going to come from reallocation of current resources. I don't know. I know when I talk with our CFO group, I don't think there's a single one of us that would say, well, we've got some great plan other than how we look at internally how we're allocating resources. So I think it's just a function of that's what we're going to have to do is really focus on internally how do we better leverage and reallocate the resources we already have.
Ryan, it's been brought up at previous board meetings, this idea of differential tuition. Is that what you call it, Dave? If that is to ever become a reality, I don't know if we'll ever do it, but have we done any projections on the potential revenue gains from that? Because I think that is if everything's on the table, or we want to put some more creative things on the table, what would be the revenue, increase if we were to do something like that? Have we done that analysis yet?
So we've done some, and what I really do want to spend time as we start our next planning cycle is, rather than looking at the next year, I think we want to bring kind of a 5-year plan back to the board, and we want to layer in some of these key assumptions and say, if we did this, what does it do? I think what we have to be careful with on differential tuition is I'm not sure it provides a whole lot of new net revenue as much as maybe it differentiates who's paying for what. My own belief, as I've said before, is I think if anything it's more in response to the fact that parents and students are now paying for more of the cost of the education, and I think you're going to start to see demand, and I think this is across the country, you're going to see more demand to be paying for the price of the program that they're in versus paying just a flat rate of tuition. So I don't know. I think there could be some revenue gain there, but I wouldn't sit here and tell you there's huge upside.
Brian, not to interject, but I always do, and I can't help myself, and I apologize to everybody. But one of the issues that we're facing now, not having differential, is we try to make up for it in ways like auxiliary charges and fees. And this has really complicated our ability to be efficient on financial aid. And so as you look at enrollment, and I haven't talked to Clem about this yet, but as you look at enrollment, if we could do something like that makes financial aid easier, and where the student can be getting 100% instead of finding out all of a sudden they're at 80% because 20% of it is in fees and auxiliary charges, I think that could have an impact not just on the revenue from the existing students, but on our enrollment process too.
Yeah, and I think when we've talked about differential tuition, there could be some revenue positive there for us, but I think to some extent it's more about how do we make the pricing more transparent to students. So I think there's other reasons we'd look at it beyond just what the revenue is.
Ryan, that third bullet point, and you and I have talked about this, was reallocation of resources, and tremendous efforts were made in that area over the last several months. What about the ongoing efforts? I mean, because that's going to be critical. How is that being done? Where in leadership is that effort still being underway to reallocate resources?
So I think each campus is working through that process on how they're reallocating resources, and I think you've raised a good point. I don't think anyone felt like we were done when we hit June. I think that's just one of those things that we're continually looking at. We do meet monthly to talk about where our risks and opportunities are. That's something we did start out of this year's budget process. So it's also something then we have an oversight role to play at the system when we're looking at that.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions, comments on this? We've got one other information and action item coming up, and so now we get to talk about some good news. The Treasurer and Chief Investment Officer, Tom Richards, and Denis Averis, the university's investment consultant, will review the University of Missouri fiscal year 2017 investment performance, and then we have amendments to the collected rules and regulations on investments.
Curator Steelman, I'm going to step out again. Thank
That's
you.
correct. Thank you. I wish you could stay. But
Well, thank you for the opportunity to deliver some good news about this past year and maybe some challenging information for the years going forward that we'll talk about in the action item. First, I wanted to introduce Barry Denis, who will be part of the presentation. Barry is our investment consultant, and I was just reflecting back on our time together. I'd taken over this role in early 2011, and one of the things that I had to do among many was reevaluate the entire program and approach, and one of the things that we had done at that time was to do a search for investment consultant, and that's when Barry and his firm was hired by the board. And so we've kind of partnered for these 6 years on rebuilding the entire portfolio and process, and we've made quite a bit of improvements, and we'd like to talk about some of those today and then thinking about going forward. I'd also like to recognize Tom Weaver in the audience, who's a member of the President's Investment Advisory Committee, who that group has also been an integral part of how we manage investments. That was something that President Forsey had started informally back in 2009, I believe. And then President Wolf and I had worked together to add more structure and formality to that group. President Choi has already met with that group twice, and they provide valuable input to our investment program, and we often have curator attendance at those meetings. Just as a bit of trivia, I have to say that Tom Weaver's father was the second president of the UM system, and so there's a long family connection with that. So thank you, Tom. I'm going to go through the performance slides fairly quickly so that we have plenty of time to talk about the forward-looking asset allocation. We talked about Veris. This slide is just a view. Each of the boxes represents an asset class, and it's more just to give the perspective of different asset classes perform differently in different environments, and diversification is good. In terms of the balances in the investment portfolios, retirement and endowment, this again just gives you some perspective. This is just a roll forward of the fiscal year, the retirement plan, the contributions that went in, the benefit payments that went out. So our retirement plan paid $231 million in benefits to retirees throughout the state of Missouri. And then the investment income was particularly strong this year, and so you can follow the ending balances. Asset returns were good. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but I would highlight just a few things. The global equity or public equity portfolio performed very well relative to its benchmark. The drivers behind that, honestly, were some of our active managers, our portable alpha program that we're going to talk about in more detail, and then our currency risk management program. So that was part of the driver, but across the board, with the exception of our inflation-linked bonds or TIPS portfolio and the commodities portfolio, everything was fairly strong, and obviously that doesn't happen that often within markets, but we will take it. The total portfolio return, so we're showing a retirement plan and endowment pool, the one-year actual returns as of June 30th, so our fiscal year, versus our benchmark. We had 250 basis points or 2.5% of outperformance for the retirement plan, 2.8% outperformance for endowment. We beat a passive portfolio by about 2% in retirement and 3.4% in the endowment pool. Those excess returns over our benchmark together between the two pools represented about $100 million in value creation. These slides, in the interest of time, I'll I'll skip over. They're just kind of showing the allocation of the outperformance in the portfolios for retirement and endowment. This slide, we're looking at longer-term returns over 3, 5, 7, 10 years. One comment that I would make is again, throughout the 6 years, we've really fundamentally rebuilt the portfolios entirely. We've replaced almost all of the managers. We rebuilt the private equity portfolio, the real estate portfolio. A lot of the more significant structural changes have taken place within the last 2 to 3 years. And as we would have hoped for and have expected, the performance is starting to show. I didn't mention in terms of the endowment performance this past fiscal year, we were in the top quartile in terms of performance. We were a top quartile performance the prior fiscal year as well. The retirement plan is about a median performer, and the difference being that the retirement plan is taking some less level of risk compared to the endowment pool. That's by design. We feel that's more appropriate. But I guess what I would say is that going forward, if I look at the actual versus our benchmark returns, there's performance, there's outperformance that's especially built more into the more recent years that continues to work its way through the numbers relative to what we started with 6 years ago in terms of, again, having to replace, at this point, almost the entire portfolio over time. One of the things we talked about with the board, but I know we've got new members, but we've talked about this concept of balance and having a portfolio that would perform well in different market environments. This is just a depiction. It's not entirely apparent what's going on here without further explanation, but it's showing how the return contribution of the portfolios came from different parts of the portfolio. And the sizing of these colored blocks, if you will, represent the size of the portfolio that's designed to excel. For example, the large yellow rectangle is the part of the portfolio that will do well in a rising growth environment. So obviously we're within that environment right now, and when that works and the portfolio is designed to take advantage of that, the portfolio generally will do well. The issue comes in the blue box, which represents falling growth. So think about recessionary environments. So what this visual is showing you is that the portfolio, as are most typically portfolios, they're not really built to handle those kinds of environments. One of the things we're going to talk about with asset allocation is that we're bringing a little bit more balance to the portfolio to help us get ready for the next market correction, and we'll talk about that. The general pool is something that doesn't get as much attention, but it's an important part of the university. It's a strategic resource. It represents the working capital of the university and all the entities within the university, including the healthcare system. Contains self-insurance reserves for medical programs, et cetera. We had a great year with a 4.5% return versus benchmark of 1.2. We've got a pretty diversified mix of managers in there that have been specially selected as part of an overall risk management program. I would also say that the rating agencies pay particular attention to this as the working capital of the university and our balances. And one of the comments that I noted in the latest Moody's in-depth report, they specifically pointed out a key strength of the university was its strong working capital position. And so we're very careful about the level of risk that we take on. But this certainly is meaningful to the bottom line, as Ryan had talked about in the change in net assets. And this pool also makes available strategic resources for the president to invest in critical initiatives. Favorite topic always is investment management fees, and I'm just showing the fees overall of the retirement plan, endowment plan, and general pool versus the prior year. We always talk about fees. We always have questions about fees. It's something that we work on. Obviously, we're always after getting the best fee structure for the university that we can. We've been moving where we can to more performance-based or incentive fees, and I have an example that I'll show you that I shared with you last year as well in a slide coming up. One of the things I'll point out, though, in terms of we've always talked about having our asset allocation strategy drive the decisions, and sometimes the fees come along with that. And the example I'd use is private equity. So private equity is probably the most expensive asset class in terms of fees that are paid to managers. and we have about 10% of the portfolio in private equity. If I look back over the last 3 years, private equity has outperformed public equity, like our own public equity portfolio, by about 7%. So over that 3-year time period, while we've paid the fees to private equity managers, the outperformance on that part of the portfolio has been 7% above the public equity alternative, which is translated into $25 million in value in the endowment pool and $50 million in value in the retirement plan. So I'd say that while the fees are there, we also have an additional $75 million in wealth after the fees have been paid. The example I wanted to share with you, and this is an update from the prior year, again, just as an example of how we're trying to get better alignment with managers. We have a manager that's one of our strategic partners, and we negotiated a management fee of 0, and everything the manager earns is through an incentive fee, which is based on outperforming an index. There's also a high water mark, though, meaning that if the manager doesn't outperform the index, they fall below the index, they have to earn that back before they're paid an incentive fee. So this is just an example of the strategy was brought on in August of 2015. The excess return column, every green box represents a month when they outperformed the index. A red column is when they underperform the index. As you can see with the first red up above, I think it's a negative 1.73%. You can see several months following in the fee column that's highlighted in yellow where there's 0 fee. So we didn't pay a fee for a good part of a year until that manager earned back basically to the point where they're back above the return. So it's a good alignment. This happens to be an excellent manager that over time we have great confidence in. And when they perform well, they will earn a good fee. When they don't perform, they won't get paid. Yes?
Tom, quick question. Is any concern on that type, even though that's good, that they take more risk to beat that index, or is it a risky asset anyway?
This happens to be an equity manager. So the risk is consistent with the benchmark risk. And, you know, in terms of the incentive, because of the high water mark, if they take on too much risk, they're risking their own fees as well. Finally, just with some retirement plan guidance, we always like to update this. It's less of a surprise this year because the fiscal year returns were well, but we always want to look to see where we are versus the assumed return with the retirement plan, which is currently 775. So through August, if we look at the 11 months through August, we were about 10.6%. And just as a reminder, the pension plan has its own year end, and that year end is September 30th. The month of September has been pretty good. I think we were just looking earlier today. The equity portfolio generally is up about 1.5% in the month of September. So my guess is that we will end that retirement plan year closer to 11%. So that is certainly good news. Any questions on performance issues or the current portfolio before we get into the recommendations going forward?
Any questions?
You had said, I think maybe at our last meeting or the meeting before, that you were moving more into, in the equity market, into exchange-traded, non-actively managed funds. What percentage are we at this point, and what is your future projection?
So, well, one of the things that we'll talk about is we're recommending to shrink the size of the public equity portfolio and shrink the role of the active managers and expand the role of the passive exposures, partly in conjunction with growing the Portable Alpha program. Active management, true active management, I'm just going from my memory, maybe it was around 60%. I think it'll be headed south, closer to 50% or less. And then other areas that we can talk about, we're eliminating active management in several other areas of the portfolio.
And the second question, and maybe I'm anticipating, but the 7.75, that we went to maybe a couple of years ago is under discussion in other pension. Are we going to get to talking about that a little bit?
Yes, yeah, that's actually this next item.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other performance questions before we head into the?
Any other performance questions? I did note that today we re-upped Barry for a year, so you played well in your contract year, didn't you? Okay, this is an action item, and Tom will go over this, because we're going to ask to amend collected rules and regulations. I want to say on this that I and Curator Sunvolt and Curator Graham all attended the President's Investment Advisory Committee meeting earlier. The proposed changes that Tom is going to present to you were actually, after a great deal of debate, somewhat heated, it was very interesting, were unanimously agreed to by the Investment Advisory Committee, which are some very well-known Toms back there, but some very sophisticated people. Go ahead.
Thank you, Curator Steelman. So I'm going to do just a brief introduction, and I'm going to cover Portable Alpha, and then I'm going to turn it over to Barry to walk through the asset allocation process. The highlight, first of all, the really 10,000-foot highlight is that, and we've been talking about this, investment returns going forward will not be what they've been in the past. It's easy to forget, I have dark memories of it, but the financial crisis, it's being removed from our memories in terms of what happened, and we've had an almost uninterrupted bull market across the board since that time, partially engineered by central banks. But regardless, we're in an environment where people begin to, the idea that you can lose money in markets is kind of faded from the memory. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is how to de-risk the portfolio somewhat in preparing for perhaps to increase volatility going forward. But regardless, the return expectations going forward are not what they've been. If you could think about it in one way, we've kind of, especially this year with the markets continuing to go up and set records with equities, we continue to pull future earnings and future performance into current day. Valuations are high. They're not crazy high as they've been, but Barry will talk a little bit more about that in terms of capital market return assumptions. But the punchline is we cannot support a return assumption of 7.75%. It's just not something that we can prudently deliver without taking on a tremendous amount of risk. And in managing the retirement plan in particular, we need to be very careful about that risk, because another market event could be very problematic for the retirement plan and then for the university's operating statement. So generally, we're going to talk about reducing our public equity allocation, reducing credit risk in the form of emerging market debt and high yield bonds. We're going to increase, recommending all these recommendations, increasing our allocation to U.S. TIPS, inflation-linked bonds, and U.S. Treasuries, expand the Portable Alpha program, which I'll talk about, improve the balance of the portfolio, and then reduce overall the risk of the portfolio. So Portable Alpha, I'm just going to talk about this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Barry. In terms of reducing risk, it is the slide that I just went over. Part of the challenge is with all investors is that those asset classes that bring more stability to the portfolio, like treasuries and TIPS, currently have a very low return, which is no surprise to any of you. One of the ways that we've been able to successfully generate some excess return in the last 2 years was through the Portable Alpha program, which we presented to the board in June of 2015. Our strategy going forward in terms of adding the balance and being able to pay for it is expanding the Portable Alpha program as an additional return engine that we think can help offset the drag of building out a position in treasuries and TIPS. I just want to go back over that and explain again what it is for our newer board members and set that up then for Barry. So if we go back to June of 2015, and I'm using slides that I presented to the board in June of 2015 because I think it's important to review what we told the board we were going to do and then what we did and what our performance was relative to the expectations. So this is a slide from June of 2015. When I talk about portable alpha, think of the simplistic example here as we discussed previously. If I want to get equity exposure in the market, let's just say in this case I'm using $350 million as an example. I can give $350 million to an active manager. They can go invest that money. They can pick stocks using their judgment, try to beat the benchmark, and that's fine. Some are successful, some aren't. I could give it to Vanguard or I could give it to BlackRock, and I could ask them to put it in a passive index fund, and I could just own the market. Today I could put it in an ETF fund, and I could get my market exposure that way with a different fee structure. But another way that I can get the same exposure at actually an often lower cost is through the use of derivatives. Through primarily futures of what we've been using in the past 2 years, but we can go out as an example and get S&P futures that give us the exact same market exposure as would an index fund. So in the example of portable alpha, if we were using this $350 million as an example, we would put $350 million in a cash account, and we would put options over the top of that would give us $350 million of exposure to the equity market, with still having $350 million in cash underneath. So the idea within portable alpha is to take some of that cash, in the case of what we've been doing, about 70% of it, and investing that in carefully selected investment strategies that happen to be in hedge fund vehicles. But the key is to select carefully managed investment strategies with very little to no correlation with the market overall where you're getting your notional exposure, and then very limited correlation to each other. So it's building a highly diversified portfolio of strategies that have very little relation to how the market that you're getting your exposure to above moves. And back in June of 2015, we talked about this. We showed the what I call the portable alpha hedge fund portfolio, the results that proxy portfolio had generated in terms of what we might expect going forward. So these are the same numbers. In terms of the example that we used over on the right-hand side, we walked through the example and the math and got to the bottom line where we were illustrating an excess return of 3.2% above the benchmark. So I'm back here to say that we did what we said we were going to do. We invested in the way that we said we were going to invest, and the portfolio so far has returned 420 basis points of excess return as opposed to the 320 that we had estimated. And it's just walking through the math on the left-hand side of the slide. First of all, the portable alpha portfolio returned 5.2% at a lower volatility than we had estimated, so that's lower risk, that's better. The correlation to equities was a negative 0.2, meaning it actually moved in an opposite direction of how equities move, which is very good. The portable alpha program overall, so including the hedge fund strategies and the notional from the derivatives, returned 15.3%. The benchmark was 11.1, getting the excess return of 4.2. One of the things that talking about risk, certainly there is risk in running the program, and as we talked about in June of 2015, there were public pension plans in particular that were running these kinds of programs back in the 2000s, running up into the financial crisis, and there were a couple of programs that did not perform very well. In fact, you might say they blew up. And you look back and you learn from the mistakes of others, and when you look at those programs that were run at the time, the problem was, whereas we're showing here taking 30% of the capital and leaving it in cash and investing 70%, there were programs that were leaving about 5% of the notional in cash and investing 95%. So when markets moved, they had no liquidity. So without going into an immense amount of detail, in terms of expanding this program, we're proposing that we expand it from just the public equity program into treasuries, tips, and commodities. The idea being that the risk with portable alpha is not the risk of the underlying hedge funds. The risk is that all these asset classes move every day, and you have to have the cash to satisfy the market move. So for example, if you have $100 million in equity exposure with futures and equities drop, you settle that cash on a daily basis. So it's very important to have a solid, strong liquidity program to manage that. It's actually the case when we expand the program and we fund that with additional asset classes, you have the effect of dampening the volatility overall, because equities and treasuries and tips and commodities tend not to move together. So you've got benefits of offsetting benefits of cash coming in, cash going out. But in any case, we're recommending that we maintain a 30% cash margin for the program. And based on our modeling that we've done with Veris and thinking about risk, the 30% cash margin provides us protection for a 3 standard deviation market event. And we could probably spend 20 minutes talking about that, but that's a good position to be in. And I just would go back to the programs that had trouble prior to the financial crisis. They were running with 5, maybe on the high end, 10% cash, and we're suggesting 30%. And that cash would be in highly liquid, most likely Treasury securities. This is just sort of an update on the Portable Alpha portfolio, the sizing of it. We're recommending that we move from 7% of capital to 20% of capital. The managers, for the most part, would stay the same. We'd like to expand some. The strategies I've got on the left side of the screen, they're all very diversified. They're all very liquid strategies. Some have bi-monthly liquidity. Most have monthly liquidity, so we can get access to our capital. Then in terms of return assumptions, if we look at the 5-year performance of the managers that we're recommending for the program, they produced a 6.7% annualized return over the past 5 years. For modeling purposes, we're assuming 4.2% going forward. So we're being fairly conservative with that. Just the final point, just because these are hedge funds, which that term doesn't mean a whole lot, these kinds of strategies are not designed to beat the S&P 500. There's a famous bet that's gone on with Warren Buffett and some hedge fund managers. The purpose of the objectives of these hedge funds are actually not to beat the market. They're to be unlike the market, to be uncorrelated with the market. So that when the market, in this case, say equities, when the market's going down, you hopefully have an investment in something that's not going down and in fact could be making money. So that's the importance of these, and that's why the selection of the strategy is critical. So with that, are there questions with Portable Alpha? I know it's covering a lot in a short amount of time, but I wanted to highlight that first because this is what can help pay for the risk reduction that Barry will talk about in terms of expanding into treasuries and tips. Okay. So here's just 2 more slides, and I'm going to turn it over. This might be the most important takeaway of anything that Barry or I are going to say. And what this is, there's probably 60 to 70 lines on this graph. And what this is showing is the proposed portfolio mix that we're going to talk about and how it would have performed in each 5-year rolling period from 1930 to present. So if we went back to 1930 and we took the asset mix that we're proposing, each of those lines represents a successive 5-year period through the last century. And the point is, when we talk about a return expectation, which in this case today will be 7.2%, it's just to remember that's a median. And there's a wide band above and below in terms of potential outcomes. And that's really important when we're talking and thinking about risk and managing risk. And one of the reasons why the portfolio that Barry is going to go over with you is actually reducing risk, which we think is pretty important right now given where markets are. Balance, this is the last thing just to follow up. So if these four quadrants were perfectly balanced, you'd have a truly balanced portfolio that should perform well in any environment. That's hard to do. There are a lot of reasons why that's hard to do. The typical pension plan is on the left-hand side. Our current portfolio is in the middle, and the proposed portfolio for retirement is on the right-hand side. And what you'll see the biggest growth, in fact, almost all the growth, is in sort of the part of the portfolio that should do well in falling growth or a recession. And with that, I will turn it over to Barry to go through the process and the details.
Thank you, and thank you for renewing our contract. In a couple of days, maybe a week, you're going to pick up your newspaper and you're going to read that the U.S. economy has been in expansion for 8.5 years. And that will mark the second longest expansion since World War II, second only to the period from 1991 to 2001, which lasted 10 years. We all know how that one ended. It wasn't pretty. So when we set out on this project at the beginning of the year, we knew we wanted to take risk off the table. We knew we wanted to diversify our risk away from the equity market. But we also knew that we couldn't reduce the expected return because there are very few, if any, public plan sponsors in the nation today that can afford to put more and more money into their pension funds. There are other budget considerations that are just as important. So that's what we set out to do, as Tom explained. And then when I get towards the end of this presentation, we're going to look under the hood at the risks of the portfolio to see if we've accomplished those objectives. Now, to start this, we have to make some forecasts about what we think various markets are going to do over the longer term, and I define that as 10 years. Not only what they will return, but how much uncertainty there is behind our forecast. The bigger the risk expectation, which is the standard deviation forecast, the greater the uncertainty. As Tom said, we make fairly realistic assumptions. They're not heroic, they're not pessimistic. And I'll point out some of the things that are interesting on this page. There's a lot of numbers. First of all, we think the US equity market is only going to return about 4.7% per year over the next 10 years. The historical average is about 10. So US stocks are pretty expensive. PE ratios at their second highest level, second only to what we saw in 2000. And growth in the US is tending to flatline. On the other hand, we have higher than normal expectations on the non-US markets. You can see 9.7 and 9.7 on the developed markets, slightly lower on the emerging markets. Now, the international markets, their PE ratios are actually below normal, despite the rally we've had. And we're also seeing acceleration of growth. They're not growing as fast as the US quite yet, getting very close, but the growth is accelerating rather than flatlining. The other sort of interesting thing on this is that we're not expecting to get a lot of money out of the bond portfolio. So if we just buy US tips or treasuries, we're going to get about 2.5%. That's about what they're yielding today. So nothing heroic there. If we look at real estate, we have three categories of real estate towards the bottom. We have the core, the real safe stuff in the biggest cities, 4.6. If we take a little bit more risk and go to the secondary markets, 6.6. And if we look at things where there's a lot of rehabilitation being done, it's 8.6. So about 6.6% for real estate. You'll see at the bottom of the first table, private equity, 7.8%. Not heroic return expectations, and that's the key point I want to make. The next step in the process is to put all of these numbers, along with what we call the expected correlations, how they move in tandem with each other, into a computer program and see how diversified portfolios might turn out. Now, I'm going to get to a second level of objectives in this process, but also the constraints. So we want lower overall risk. We want a broader distribution of risk so we're not tied completely to the ups and downs of the equity market. We want the portfolio to do better than it would have done if we hadn't made any changes when we do enter inevitably that recession or rising inflation. Now, I don't know exactly when that's going to happen. I do know it will happen, and I do know that the market will recognize it before the government statisticians do. So we want to begin positioning the portfolio for that inevitable outcome. As I said, and Thomas said, when you reduce those risks, you also reduce your expected return. We can't afford to do that. So we're going to try to get that return back by expanding the very successful Portable Alpha program, which today is about 7%, up to about 20%. Now, Tom mentioned that we had a meeting 3 weeks ago with your investment advisory committee. This is the same panel we showed them. We distilled probably 100 different alternatives that Tom and I have looked at down to 3 alternatives, all of which tend to accomplish those objectives we set out at the beginning. So you see the base case of where we are today. And it has 37% in what we call global equities. Now, if you were to invest across the globe today, you'd have a portfolio that's 52% in the US stock market and 48% in the non-US market. Just a point of reference. Mix number 1, we just take that 37% invested 52-48 down to 32%, and we build up some other asset classes that diversify those risks. I'll get to that in a bit. Mix number 2 takes that 52-48 distribution and tilts it towards the international market, where the international is now 55 and the US market is now 45. So it tends to take advantage of those forecasts that we have that non-US is going to do it better than the US. Mix number 3 says, maybe we shouldn't take so much equity risk off the table, and it only takes it down to 35%. That's what's going on in the equity part of the portfolio. Then in the next section, we have what's really our bond portfolio. And it's not all bonds, but it's all debt. Right now, we've got a bunch of different debt strategies. Besides core bonds, which is treasuries, mortgages, et cetera, we've got high yield, we've got global sovereign debt, we've got emerging market debt. Now, if you look under the hood at things like emerging market debt, high yield credit, even core bonds, a lot of that risk exposure is credit. It's not interest rate risk, it's credit risk. And credit risk behaves a lot like equity risk. If the economy is growing, those things do really well. The economy goes into recession, they do very poorly. So we are intending to change the flavor of our bond portfolio to eliminate a lot of the credit risk and invest the bonds in 2 risk areas. One is expose it to interest rate risk through treasuries, and then also to buy what are called TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protection Securities, to immunize the portfolio in case that inflation component begins to go up. And inflation has been very low for a long time, and it can't stay there forever. And then the other major change at the bottom is you see the Portable Alpha program. That's the third one from the bottom, going from 7% to 20%. In order to do that, we have to take our cash position from -7% to -20%, which funds the growth in that portable alpha program. Question number one, are we reducing the risk? Currently, our forecasts say your current portfolio has a risk of 11.5%. We get that down to 10.4, 10.2 in mix 2, and 10.8 when we bring the equities back up. Let me get right to the punchline. When Curator Steelman talked about the unanimous consent of the advisory committee, it was for mix number 2. So at mix number 2, we bring our risk from 11.5 to 10.2, or about a 10% reduction in risk. The expected return actually goes up despite the reduction of risk because of the wonders of that portable alpha program. So the expected return goes from 6.8 to 7.2. The Sharpe ratio, which is a measure of our efficiency, how well we're managing that risk, actually goes up by 18%. So that is the proposal that is going to be put forward today. The endowment pool has greater risk tolerance than the pension fund. And let me give you a simple explanation of why. If the markets go down a lot, the retirement pool really gets hurt, because not only do your asset values go down, but your liability continues to grow at 7.5%. The endowment doesn't have that second component of risk. It doesn't have that double whammy, because you can control spending. You can adjust spending to your performance. With the retirement, that spending is mandatory. So in regard to the endowment, we're taking down the equity exposure, as you see here, from 43 to about 35, but still doing the same things with a lot of the bond portfolio, taking out those credit exposed bonds and upping the inflation risk protection and upping the portable alpha. I think we all know when we talk about risk, we talk about standard deviation, and as you as educators, I'm sure you understand it. Most students get C, a lesser number but equal number get B's and D's, and a lesser number but equal number get A's and B's. At least that's the way they used to grade when I was in college. Skip over some of these. So let's start looking at some of the risk, which I promised we do. So this says how different is what we're recommending than what we're currently doing. And it comes down to a risk differential of 2.4%. What that means is the recommended policy should perform like the existing policy in a range of plus or minus 2.4% per year. I'm not saying it's going to be higher or lower, but most of the time it's going to stay in that range. So I would call these sort of modest changes, although there's significant changes going on in the underlying portfolio. We're also cognizant of what our peers are doing. And in this case, we define our peers as public pension funds $1 billion or greater. You don't want to be so different from them, because it's going to end up in the paper that you either outperformed the average pension fund, and you don't want to get too far off that mark. The current policy says that we're about 1.1% different than our peer. So that means 2 out of 3 years we'll be within 1.1% of that median peer. By making the change to mix number 2, that differential goes to 2.4%. Again, I would characterize that as a modest differential. It's not saying it's better or worse. That's just describing the range of outcomes we should anticipate. This is probably the most important page, but it looks at how our risks are decomposed. The most striking thing here is our current policy, 77%, or more than 3/4, is tied to the whims of the equity market. Mix 2 brings that down to 69%. Where we're increasing our risk exposure is to interest rates. You see, we go from -2% to 4%. I tend to look at interest rate exposure as buying an insurance policy. We're not expecting a great return from it, 2.5%. But what we're buying is, if we do enter recession, bonds are going to do very well. The Federal Reserve will cut interest rates to stimulate the economy, and your bond portfolio will be your best performing asset class. We're also increasing the risk allocation to inflation-sensitive instruments, primarily these TIPS I talked about. And that basically doubles, going from 9% of our risk allocation to 17%. So yes, maybe these changes may seem marginal to you, but we're extending the balance of our risk exposure through the adoption of mix number 2. A couple other ways to look at risk. Beta, how much you go up and down in concert with the equity market. We take that down quite a bit, from 0.57 to 0.49. Duration, which says how you'll do if interest rates go up or down, we're basically doubling that. These I consider insurance premiums that we may be paying, but when they pay off, we're going to be glad we had them. Next, we look at sort of back tests, how these portfolios would do in certain environments, either very bad or very good. I'll point to the subprime meltdown, which was the big one. And instead of going down 30%, we go down 27%. Not a big saving, but every little bit helps. If you look at the dot-com bubble bursting in the early 2000s, again, we're a little bit better off. I think the most interesting scenario is the 1994 U.S. interest rate hike. Let's go back to 1994. Alan Greenspan was chairman of the Fed, and he launched what was called, at that time, a preemptive strike against inflation. So short-term rates went from 3.5 to 5.5. 10-year rates went from 5.5 to 7.5. It was terrible for the bond market, but you know what? It was worse for the equity market. So this portfolio actually outperforms your current portfolio in that period where interest rates rose substantially. Finally, as Tom showed you just a little while ago, we fill up those boxes more so that are subject to the less than attractive environments. For the last 8.5 years, we've been in this environment of rising growth and falling inflation. That's what I call the Goldilocks environment, because it's like the porridge, not too hot, not too cold, just right. And that's good for both stocks and bonds. But we're not always in that type of environment. We've been in that environment for a long time, and the odds are beginning to tilt that we're going to enter some environment that's not Goldilocks. It may be higher inflation, it may be falling growth, but that's exactly what we want to prepare for. With that, I'll just summarize by saying our recommendation and the recommendation of your Investment Advisory Committee is to move to that more balanced, risk-balanced portfolio outlined in mix number 2, which reduces equity, takes out the equity-sensitive fixed income investments, and builds inflation protection into the portfolio while expanding the excess returns we've been realizing from the very successful Portable Alpha program. Questions?
Any questions or discussion?
Yeah, Barry, I have one, or Tom. If your projections for 10 years on equities, that international would almost double U.S., and I think you said mix 2, the equity portion would now be 55-45 international?
Yes, sir.
Does that, for you guys, could that go higher? If your projections at, again, international would be double on an annual basis for 10 years?
Perhaps if we weren't in the fishbowl, we would be doing just that. Let me tell you what our peers are doing on that dimension. So right now, we're 52 US, 48 international. Our peers are more like 65, 35. So even where we are today, we're outside the peers and we're moving even further. I think there's a limit into how far we go with respect to how we're going to look versus our peers if we're wrong.
Two other just quick points I wanted to make just specific about Portable Alpha, just to give you some insight in the thought process. When we started modeling this, we actually started with a 25% target to Portable Alpha. And to be honest, the strategies and the managers that go into that are so critical. They're going to determine the success of the program. And at the end of the day, I didn't have confidence personally that we could easily identify additional strategies to fill up that bucket. So the 20% number came in part from being able to deploy capital with managers that we would trust that met the needs of the program. Would have liked to have gone more, but I just didn't think that was the right thing to do and from a risk perspective. The other thing, if the board approves the changes, even though they seem to be at the margin, there's still a good reduction in the equity exposure in the portfolio, and again, going into tips and treasuries. The markets are, as you know, very kind of unsettled right now. It looks like growth might continue. We're not quite sure where interest rates are going to go. The central banks are beginning to unwind their balance sheets. All of which to say is that if we adopt this portfolio, our intent is to take a period of time, maybe up to 6 to 9 months, and to very methodically reduce the equity exposure while we're building up the treasury position. In the event that equities continue to run, we don't want to make a decision that will cut that off. Likewise, if there happens to be an increase in interest rates, we don't want to put the position on all at once. We want to do it very methodically over time. And our intent would be to share a very specific plan with the board with you at the point in time when we send out our third quarter update report, which would be within about 3 weeks, so that we would communicate up front what the plan would be to reduce equities and build out treasuries, and then we would follow up each quarter in terms of informing the board of going according to plan.
I think, Tom, you just answered my question then. So you think to go to asset mix 2, it would probably be a process over as much as 9 months?
Yeah. And, we would think about, maybe something like reducing our equity exposure, maybe 1%. We just don't, it wouldn't be wise to do everything at once, not having any idea what would happen in the markets. And we think that's just the prudent way.
Thank you.
And Tom, the 30% cash on Portable Alpha allows, I guess, you to sleep at night? I mean, that's the cushion.
Yeah. And plus, great confidence in the managers and the strategies over time. That's not, and I certainly will say, that's not to say that every year in, year out, the Portable Alpha program will outperform. But the other thing I didn't mention, the bogey for that Portable Alpha program, if you really cut down to the actual risk you're taking, we have to out-earn cash. So in other words, if we have that $100 million in notional and derivatives and the cash sitting underneath, there's a financing cost of having the options in place, and it's the cash rate. So if we're going to take part of that cash and invest in hedge funds, our bogey from a risk perspective is to out-earn cash. And that I'm extraordinarily confident and comfortable that we can do, and frankly, I think over time, over market cycles, we'll do much more.
So I've got a couple of questions. This is the best explanation that you've given in the few years that I've been on the board about the more actively managed portfolio that we have. So I won't ask Don Downing's question of past years this year.
I think Don is fading into
He's
memory.
fading.
Wow.
But I do have this question, just ballparking it, because I'm interested in the management fees, and as I understand it, we have two types of fees. We have Barry and his firm that are giving you and the investment group advice about allocation and also advice about selection of the managers in the various sectors. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then you can lump all of those managers, which have changed in the last few years almost entirely, together, but for a one-year period. Now, we've been in an up market, at least in equities. So what is what's the overall asset allocation fee that we're paying on an annualized basis? You know, rounded to the nearest $10 million.
Well, so if we go back to, I've got the materials here just from the performance update. Our fees, our management fees in FY17 were about 28 million for the retirement plan and about 12 million for the endowment pool.
And that's for the overall management. And what about the managers who you use for the actual investments? What does that run roughly?
Well, that's all in.
That's all inclusive.
That's all inclusive.
Well, I'm looking to separate, if you would, Barry's company.
Oh, sure. So using that, well, and actually the retirement plan and the endowment pool are both in FY17 at 85 basis points, so 0.85% in fees. So of that, 81 of that 85 is with the investment managers. And then 4 basis points, actually 3 basis points is for investment custodial services. So in our case, Northern Trust for the custody services, and 1 basis point is consultants and legal. So it's a relatively small part of the overall structure.
And if we're in a wildly down market, we approach 3 standard deviations, and how much of this on the active manager side, not the overall advice, how much of it is incentive based so that they may actually have substantially less fees because of, even though you change the risk allocation, that everything goes down, would the fees substantially be reduced because much of it is on an incentive-based fee? Or
Well,
not?
we'd have to go through asset class by asset class. I mean, certainly real estate and private equity, that's a component of it. If we're looking at the Portable Alpha program and the managers that are underneath there, there's incentive fee structures there. And then again, where we can in the other cases, we've moved to that. You know, honestly, there aren't that, like the example above with the 0% in all incentive fee, there aren't that many managers that will do that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we press them when we can, and that's always something we're interested in, is a management fee as low as possible with a higher incentive fee.
I will say that by wiping out that credit portion of the fixed income portfolio, we're going to have a big reduction in fees. Our fixed income exposure is going to be 0. I mean, our fixed income fee is going to be very close to 0, and it might be 30 or 35 basis points today.
Yeah.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Good explanation.
Any other questions or discussion? Tom, just to make sure, because John and Marcy and I sat through that meeting, I want the whole board to understand that in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of summed up in some of the red lines in all these investment pools. Part of it says these investment objectives seek to prioritize the long-term structural needs of the endowment pool, but it's true for the other pools over short-term performance comparisons of the investment portfolio relative to peers. We are making, when we adopt these changes, a board decision to avoid risk. We are making a decision. We're not chasing returns.
To reduce risk. And Curator Seelman, that's a great point. And the risk that we have is, as Barry talked about, we're making moves that are further away from our peer group. And we're doing that because we think it's the right thing to do. I can read the industry articles every day about pension plans or endowments that are out there. They're adding risk. They're adding to their private equity exposures. They're adding to real estate. And they're doing it because they have to meet a return target, which, again, this is a discussion about the pension plan we'll have in December. But they've got unrealistic return expectations, which is causing them to reach for returns, which is causing them to add more risk to their portfolios at what we think is exactly the wrong time. We're reducing risk when a lot of our peers are adding to their risk. So our risk from a performance standpoint is that the market continues in happy land for another 2 to 3 years, and that could happen. We think the odds are diminishing that it will continue without a correction, but that could happen. And if that does happen, we will have underperformance relative to our peer group because of the risk decisions that we've made.
And that's all I wanted the board to understand, because I agree with your changes, but the whole board needs to understand, because you know how this game works sometimes, and someone will come in and say, well, why did so-and-so do 1% or 2% better than you? We are making a decision to be risk averse at this time.
That's correct.
But by the same token, we could be wrong, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the biggest exposure that we have is that the equity markets continue on a run. We continue to set records. I mean, we're setting all-time equity records, it seems like every other week. That could continue for a while. And that's one of the reasons why we want to have a pretty methodical transition plan over 6 to 9 months, because we don't want to get caught up in any particular market timing event. But it can only go on for so long, and when it ends, for all the people that have been adding to risk, there will be pain. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is not eliminating our risk. This will reduce the level of pain that we will have, but there will still be pain when a market correction comes.
Tom, we as a board have two fiduciary responsibilities here. One is we have to continue to worry about that return target because of the obligation that we have that cannot be changed.
Right.
But we also have that the need to avoid unreasonable risk. And I think what you're saying right now is we have to concentrate on reducing any unreasonable risk.
Yeah, when you look at the math of it, losing less is always more powerful than not making as much.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about. But yeah, the return expectation is 7.2%. Our current actuarial assumption is 7.75. So when we come back in December, after having more work done by our actuaries, we'll have a board discussion about what the actuarial assumptions should be. But I can tell you that we cannot support 7.75. It's not realistic.
And that's what the investment committee told us loud and clear.
Yeah.
Okay, any more discussions, questions? If they're not, I would like someone on the finance committee to ask if they have a motion to recommend to the full board to approve the existing investment policies of collected rules and regulations 140.010, 140.011, 140.013, 140.015, that those be amended, and that 140.017 be established. This is all as provided in your materials in the red lines, but was summed up by the presentation.
So moved.
Second.
Cindy?
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunvolt.
Yes.
Okay, you have all committee votes in favor?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a motion?
You may.
I move to approve the existing investment policies as aforesaid, and establish the new one. And is anyone going to second that shorthand motion?
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comment or discussion? If not, we'll have a roll call vote. Cindy, could you call the roll?
Curator Burnsick, Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Graham,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunvolt.
Yes.
Steve,
All
the
votes in
aforesaid
favor.
was okay.
I know they're going to hang around, but I think we do need to express our appreciation, certainly to the committee, but also to Tom and to Barry for some good work and an excellent explanation.
Tom Weaver, who I think is.
And Tom Weaver is also here, yes. Do you have anything else from the?
That, if I have nothing further from the Finance Committee, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Curator Burnsick? Yes. Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Curator Sunvold?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have, the next item on the agenda is Health Affairs Committee. Let me suggest, we've been going pretty long, let's take just a very short 10-minute break, 7 to 8, 10 minutes, because we've got a lot to do with health affairs, but I think we need, we were starting to lose curators.
Bill needs it too. Yeah, I will.
Call this one that you take over. I'll just call the meeting to order.
Okay, we're about ready to go into the Health Affairs Committee and give a couple people time to get back to their seats. If I can give you what the agenda is going to be. We actually have a couple of action items as well as some reports. We'll do the reports first. I think everybody on the board knows that we've had a transition in the last 6 months, and Jonathan Curtright has become the CEO of MU Healthcare. And we get reports now more periodically, and we appreciate that. And then we have once a year an annual report. So Jonathan, if you would walk us through, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Curator Phillips. I can assure you my talk will be a little bit less beta and Excel driven. I actually have a few slides in here of the Faroe Family Fun Night where we showed Beauty and the Beast. So it'll be a little bit more hopefully laid back. So it's my privilege to give you an update on our performance here at MU Healthcare over the last year, and then also give you a glimpse of what we're going to be doing over the next couple of years. Where are we going to go today? I'd like to give you an update on our employees and our leadership, our absolute number one asset. I think that we have an excellent story relative to quality and safety of care, and we'll give some updates on that. We've got some good solid plans around growth, education and research. I think we've heard a little bit about our finances, and then most importantly, I want to give a look ahead of what we have coming down the pike. I handed out some slides to the curators, and then for the press, anybody else would like some, Ms. Harmon has those as well, if you'd like paper copies. All right, so employees and leadership. Right off the bat, we have had a great year becoming, I think, hopefully, the employer of choice in Central Missouri are certainly one of them. This last year, we were named the Becker's top 150 hospitals in the United States to work for. This is a very good company. Mayo, Cleveland Clinic, Geisinger, and the like. And it's something we take very seriously. In the future, I'd like to even consider doing things like trying to get on the Fortune top places to work in America that goes beyond healthcare as well. So this is something we're very, very excited about, and once again, we really aspire to be the employer of choice in Central Missouri. Here is my slide. This was a fun night that we had at Faroe Field about a month ago. Where many of our employees and their families got to spend some time at Faroe Field meeting Truman. In the bottom left-hand corner there is Chase Daniel and one of Lawrence Bowers giving autographs to many of our employees and their children. And we had a lot of fun with that. I think that I show you this slide because we really are a family at MU Healthcare, and there's a culture that we are in this together. And I think that this shows as a solid example of who we are at MU Healthcare, and we work very hard at that. So family fun at Faroe Field. We know we've got a challenge right now. Our growth is not tempered right now on number of our physical assets, if you will, of our beds. But our number one challenge that we've got, and I say this to anybody that will listen, is if you have children that are considering what they should be when they grow up, tell them to be nurses. We need lots of them, and this is a major issue for us and everywhere else in the United States. We have put together a very innovative plan for recruitment, in that we are more than willing to give referral bonuses, not for people to come in and work for us, but if you give us a referral for an experienced nurse. Furthermore, we also are more than willing to give student loan repayment up to $10,000. We will make a payment of $2,000 per year directly onto your student loan. It won't go to the person, but it'll go directly to the organization. For the people that are nurses in those same hard-to-recruit areas, we are also willing to make that $2,000 investment in a retention reward. If you are willing to stay for a year, we will also make that retention as well. We also know that we have major hard-to-recruit areas on the weekends. Let's face it, most people would rather work 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. If you're a nurse, you're giving up a lot to work on the weekends or work at night. So we have been able to do some major investments in our weekend program. And we have many nurses that have decided to work or leave the nursing field, leave the bedside, and we're putting together refresher courses, if you will, for nurses to go back to the bedside. We are making major investments. This is an example of the innovations that we're trying to make, and because of this, we've been able to show some good, solid improvements. We have a goal of having 400 nurses this year, incremental, or 400 nurses including incremental growth as well as turnover, and it is a major taxing moment for our HR, but one we're doing well with. In terms of employee engagement, the University of Missouri just had its climate survey. We also, at MU Healthcare, also do an employee engagement survey every January. We gave a heads up to the group last year that when we did this with Gallup, we were in the 35th percentile last year. This last year, when we did the second round of this, we increased to the 50th percentile. That may not seem like that big of a jump, but there are 100 different health systems that are in this database. So that means that we jumped over 15 of the 100 top health systems in the United States. And something we're very, very excited about, and we want to continue to see nice incremental improvements in this overall engagement survey. In terms of leadership changes, this has definitely been a year of change within MU Healthcare, but one we're very excited about. Thank you very much for the chance to serve as the Chief Executive Officer at MU Healthcare. It has been an unbelievable chance to serve. I've been honored to have Dr. Steve Witt join us as the Chief Clinical Officer. Once again, many places are trying to combine the CMO role and the Chief Operating Officer role, and we were able to do that with Dr. Steve Witt. We also were able to recruit Dr. Mary Beck, and an outstanding partnership with Sinclair School of Nursing. She was a faculty member there, and then prior to that, she was the Chief Nursing Officer at Boone Hospital. So two of our major executive roles that we've been able to fill. Jeremy Fotheringham is an outstanding young executive, and he is now the Executive Director for University Hospital, and as I've told many around the table, he joins us from Intermountain Healthcare in Salt Lake City, truly one of the best healthcare systems in the United States. Is doing a bang-up job. Jennifer May, that you will be hearing about, also is serving as our acting Chief Clinical Officer, our Chief Compliance Officer, sorry for the typo on there, and she's doing a bang-up job with a corporate integrity agreement in our compliance area. And then finally, Jennifer Dahl is serving as our acting, basically, CFO. So good, solid leadership, if you will. I think we've had a lot of changes, but I think that we're coming out of this in good shape, and our team is coming together. We have a few more steps to take, but our leadership team is coming together pretty well. So that takes care of our employees and leadership changes. In terms of quality and safety of care, this is a slide that shows our mortality risk, if you will. Down is good, down on this slide. That means basically that the risk, the O to E, the observed to expected ratio, is going down, and you want it to go down. We are very much a top performer in the University Health System Consortium in this particular area, and we're solidly making steps in this particular area. So mortality is definitely a quality metric that we pay very closely to. What about readmissions? So you go to the hospital, and 30 days later, you have to get seen at Phelps Hospital in Rolla. That's called a readmission. And readmissions are bad. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for our patients. We want this to be dropping. We were at about 12% last couple of years, and we have seen a major decrease to about 10.8 to 11% of late. Now, one thing on this slide that I think is important, if you notice on the far right side, is it's going down in a very precipitous manner, in a very solid manner. And I said, well, why is that? And so we are a very data-driven organization, and every dot on here represents, or shows every project that we had in terms of our family medicine, in terms of identifying congestive heart failure patients, knowing exactly where we are making significant solid improvements to drive down our readmissions rate. Once again, every one of these represents a continuous improvement project that we've been actively working on to drive down our readmissions. So once again, our readmission rates are going very much in the right direction. Overall, the number one metric that I pay attention to in terms of the overall performance, if you will, for an academic medical center is the University Health System Consortium Quality and Accountability Survey. There are 107 academic medical centers in the United States, and 3 years ago, in 2015, we were ranked 56th. Last year we were 43rd, and this last year we were 37th. Very solid improvement. This is a data-driven assessment. It's not an assessment of reputation of your performance like the U.S. News and World Report. It's actual performance in terms of quality, safety, service, and efficiency. And it's something that we very much pay attention to. This puts us basically at about the 35th percentile of all academic medical centers in the United States, and we want to see a nice, steady improvement in this area over time, and one that we're very, very excited about. So quality and safety. In terms of growth, what's going on historically? As we've shown the slide several times, but I think it's important and instructive for everybody to be reminded of it. We are bucking a trend nationally, as well as in our state. On the far left-hand side are the discharges, the inpatient discharges in the state of Missouri are down 5.4%. In the area around Columbia, it's down 8%. And for MU Healthcare, that exact same area, we're up 21%. So we are making very solid improvements in growing and bucking the trend. Eventually, we anticipate that this is going to slow down. But once again, we've seen very solid growth, and this is one of the major drivers of our financial performance. In terms of our market share, this is the market share data for the last 5 years. And once again, we saw about 0.7% increase in our market share in the 25-county catchment area. Why is this important? Every 1% increase in this market share represents approximately 1,000 discharges. 1,000 discharges turns into $35 million of net patient revenue. So this slide alone is hundreds of millions of dollars of good, solid growth in our particular hospital. What about Boone County? Boone County has gone from 51% to nearly 60%, 58%. And this is something that we're work very hard at every single day. So it's not just in the area around Columbia, but it's also in our own home county of Boone County. So good, solid growth over the last 5 or 6 years. To meet this demand, we've been making major investments in our facilities. The Missouri Orthopedic Institute, to me, is one of the best stories that is out there. I think this is truly one of the best stories that the overall University of Missouri has. It is truly a model of care. You have outstanding research that is happening with the vet school and also in the School of Medicine. You have outstanding research facilities on the 4th floor that are funded by philanthropy. You have outstanding educational spaces that are there. You have outstanding procedural and imaging areas that are there, and the clinics as well as the inpatient setting. That Missouri Orthopedic Institute is more than a building. It is a model of care, and it makes it so that people that are going to be willing to come from all over the state of Missouri and beyond to get their care and entrust it to us. This is what we need to do more and more of over time, and especially in areas like oncology and cardiovascular diseases, and this is going to be what we're going to be shooting for in the future. We just opened up phase 2 of the Missouri Orthopedic Institute. We've definitely had some growing pains associated with, as you all probably have experienced when you move into a new house, but in general, things are going well with that. So big expansion that we've had this last year. Our emergency department, for anybody that's gone past the front of University Hospital lately, it's definitely is a kind of a major construction zone, if you will. This is a rendering of what our new emergency department is going to look like. We've got about 70,000 visits that are going through our existing emergency department. That's only about 30 visits total in that, or 30 exam rooms total in that area. That's going to jump to about 55 to 60, depending on exactly what we do. So this is a good, solid growth. Our emergency department is too efficient right now in terms of throughput per room, and so this is what example of the rendering that's going to happen in the near future as that gets going. We also just are in the middle of a master facility space planning process with Canon Design. And one of the things that came out loud and clear for University Hospital is that we have our ORs at University Hospital are too full. For any of our surgeons that are there, they would say, about time you noticed in some regards. And they would be going and working until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night to make it so that they were able to get their cases in. We have a shelled space on the 3rd and 4th floor of the patient care tower. That is going to be fitted out with 6 additional exam room or operating rooms, as well as all the pre and post rooms that are there. That is all being funded out of operations and investments that we're making to meet the demand for our operating rooms, if you will. So good, solid growth. The other thing that's happened is, as you all well know, is we've been making investments in the patient-centered care learning center, and we just had that open up this last summer. So outstanding performance, outstanding growth in terms of our facilities, both clinically, education, and research-wise. What about outreach, if you will? For the first time ever, I believe, is that we now have a facility, a primary care site in Ashland. So we had the opening of the Ashland Clinic about 2 months ago, and when we were down there, the mayor took me aside and said, "Congratulations, this is wonderful. This is going to be great. It's going to be full in 6 months." There's major demand for this in Ashland, and it's an incredibly efficient space. And I said, I'll take that problem every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So Ashland Family Medicine Clinic, we have made a major investment in that particular area. For those of you in Callaway County, we just joined forces with Fulton Family Health Associates. We now have two major primary care sites in Fulton, Callaway Physicians, which we've been there for the last 3 or 4 decades, and now we also have Fulton Family Health Associates, and they're both going to be a part of the Department of Family Medicine at MU Healthcare. So we are very excited about our outreach in primary care. This is once again, we are, I think, truly one of the leaders in ensuring that you have good, solid primary care services in healthcare and academic medical centers nationally. What about growth in terms of our beds? This is the slide that makes me pause a little bit. We are trying to identify every nook and cranny where we can put a hospital bed. Once again, go back to our slide that had the 21% growth that is out there. In fiscal year 2019, we will have fitted out every space you can imagine at Women's and Children, Missouri Orthopedic Institute, and University Hospital. We will be at 643 beds. and that's about the max that we can possibly get out of our existing chassis. This is a major driver for why we're talking about affiliation with our partners. But this is an area that I want the curators to be aware of. This is should make all of us pause a little bit. If you notice on the top of the blue there where it says 152, that's women's and children's. Women's and children, you're going to see on our volumes data in just a second. We are now the #1 delivery hospital in central Missouri. We are providing NICU or neonatal intensive care unit volume or patient care like crazy. Our women's and children's hospital is not just a university hospital issue. Women's and children's is also fully maxed out, and there's no more room in the inn, if you will. So we have got to do better and be more efficient each and every day, and that's what we're working on. But nevertheless, this is the existing challenges of our assets. All right, in terms of finances, and it's been spoken about a couple of times already, but we basically had about a 10.5% operating margin last year. We produced about $100 million of operating income. Every one of our indicators and ratios was moving definitely in the right direction. If you'll notice on our days cash on hand, it's I am an old finance major, so it's all about the cash in terms of your finances. And our days cash on hand is right. We ended up this fiscal year at 208. We are now in the low 220s after the first 2 months of the fiscal year. It is interesting to me that the Moody's A-rated benchmark actually dropped to 215 days. So nationally, for Moody's A-rated healthcare systems, the balance sheet is moving in a less than stellar direction nationally. But we've been able to improve this over time. And we need to improve this over time if we're going to be making some major investments in the near future. So good solid year in terms of our finances. If you look at our total volumes, every one of our indicators, when you look at prior year actual, other than our inpatient surgeries, was moving very much in the solid right direction. We are making good, solid improvement in our growth in every one of the indicators that is out there. So good, solid work that was there. I did mention that where we are for the first couple of months of the year. We have started the year, and we were at about $18 million of profit for the first 2 months of the year, compared to a budget of $10 million. So we've started. I always am interested in making sure you start off well. So I think that we've also started off well from the past. All right, looking ahead. All right, looking ahead. One of the things that is obviously out there in the press is that we definitely are in exclusive negotiations with Boone Hospital right now. The why we're doing this, we truly believe that this will expand access for primary care and for specialty services. There will definitely be more jobs that will come back to Columbia and will definitely be allowing us to make some good solid growth and drive the economy for central Missouri and beyond. We do think that the local decision making is something that cannot be emphasized or cannot be overemphasized. It is important that doctors and staff know that their decisions that affect their practice are local. I think it's safe to say, furthermore, that there has been somewhat of an arms race between Boone Hospital and MU Healthcare in terms of facilities, equipment, resources, if you will, and we have got to stop that. It's incredibly expensive to have this duplication of services, and we must do everything we can to better partner with Boone Hospital if this is going to make sense. And then finally, and I don't want to, I think this sometimes gets lost, and it shouldn't. The University of Missouri School of Medicine is the #1, and School of Nursing are the #1 teachers for providers of nurses and for doctors in the state of Missouri. We are that provider. Physicians oftentimes that are willing to train here and nurses that are training here will oftentimes stay in the state of Missouri. If we are able to expand our clinical footprint, it's going to give us more opportunity to train nurses and doctors. And as we well know in our rural health track, for example, we know that approximately 40% of the doctors that stay in or start in the rural health track will oftentimes not only stay in the state of Missouri, but will practice in a rural setting. So if we are able to better partner with Boone Hospital, we truly believe that this will be one of the main drivers for success and the logic of it. Now, with that being said, if things do not progress with Boone, we still definitely have a good, solid strategic plan of what we want to get accomplished. I'm going to show you a glimpse of our strategic plan, and I'm happy to provide that to the curators in the future. But this is our mission, vision, and our strategic focus areas. We have to-dos and assignments and tactics and goals and accountable executives and tactics for every one of these areas, and here's an example of that. Under strategic investment, we know that we need to make major investments in selected clinical areas for oncology, for cardiovascular diseases, as well as primary care. I give you this as an example because I have a sheet for every one of these, but there's a goal, there's the objective, we have an accountable leader, a performance measure. Imagine this was a website. You could click on it and it'd tell you exactly what's going to happen. We review this every single quarter with our executive team and hopefully we are making good, solid progress in every one of these areas to implement and execute our strategic plan. This is done in concert with the School of Medicine, and I think it's been a good, solid step forward on how we're going to execute on our strategic plan. Final slide here. We do have certain strategic initiatives that I wanted to highlight to the group. One of the things that's been unbelievably successful has been our narrow network, our custom network that will make it so that Missouri employees and their dependents can get their care at MU Healthcare. We get called probably once a week by other companies, small to mid to large companies in central Missouri asking to be a part of the narrow network. We now have a strategy to do that in working with local brokers. We are going to be starting to market our narrow network to mid and large size organizations. This will be happening in the next few weeks and will be ready for January 1st. So this is something that's going to be outstanding for Cole County as well as Boone County, and we think that this is going to be a major success and once again be able to keep our growth trajectory moving in the right way. We also have many clinical integration activities that are out there. We get many calls weekly from doctors that would like to better partner with us, and partnerships can be a whole slew of areas, and we're more than willing to be flexible in that, but clinical integration activities are solid. I think one of the things that's also in terms of our future that people forget about is that we are a statewide resource. We're part of the Health Network of Missouri for Central Missouri, and Impact, which is our partnership with Mercy, as well as Mosaic and St. Joe, and becoming more of a statewide resource where we're going to be able to provide clinical services overall in the state. And then there's several other examples around that with the Tiger Institute. Cerner and Tiger Institute, for the Kansas Cityans in the room, is absolutely one of our best partners. And Cerner and the Tiger Institute, we are officially one of their beta sites, if you will, and pioneering with them and to implement some of the key technologies that are out there. So once again, we're going to be making some major investments in this. In the not too distant future, Cap Region Medical Center will feel more and more and more like a major part of MU Healthcare. And we're making solid steps in that regard in terms of information technology and as far as making recruitment for physicians and the like. But Cap Region is going to be a major step for us moving forward. And as I said earlier, and it's the same as what Ryan Rapp said earlier, we must be very good at making investments in strategic areas. We can't be all things to all people, but we know that we have some major opportunities with oncology, with cardiovascular, and then continuing to make our major investments in primary care. So, in conclusion, we are growing. We are making major investments in all of our areas in terms of staff, equipment, space. We are growing in terms of other organizations that are wanting to partner with us. We are making major investments in our programs and facilities while being a sustainable financial model for the future. And then finally, and this is the one I'm most excited about, we are investing in Mizzou. We have made major investments to the Columbia campus this last year. We were able to make a $3 million investment to the overall campus, and when they had some challenges, we've been able to make major investments with the School of Medicine, making that much more predictable for the School of Medicine, with the health professions and the School of Nursing. So we are part of the team, and clinical practice, research, and education all work together, and it's something that we work at every single day. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions from the group.
Let me just express appreciation for the investments that you have been able to generate through MU Health, and that benefit MU generally, and particularly the School of Medicine. And you're able to do that because I think it's a well-run organization and an integral part of the university.
Thank you.
You're measured in part by your margin, 10% or more operating, but I think you're moving from 5.3 to maybe as much as 7% this year, which is terrific. And you're also measured by quality of care, and that's been terrific. And finally, by the teaching and research that MU Health is able. We're blessed to have you as part of the university, and so thank you for your good report. Now we'll open it up for questions, and then I have a comment at the end.
Mr. Chairman.
Bill.
Jonathan, if we're expanding our market share, then others around us, whether it's Boone or somebody else, is losing,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
Is that a fair statement?
To a certain degree. We know that there are 16,000 discharges, patients that are getting seen in an inpatient setting in the 25 county catchment area around Columbia that are going to Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, Mayo, et cetera, and we definitely want to harvest and take some of that care that's back out there. But in general, it's true. Yeah.
Darrell?
Hey, Jonathan, yeah, great presentation, and thanks
you.
for all the hard work you're doing. The new curators had a meeting. Mark McIntosh gave us a presentation about some of the research and how the research dollars are adding up across different colleges. I was very proud that Kaffner was on top of that, I think with, I don't know, 30 million bucks. But I said, you know, when we start talking about AAU and the metrics that AAU is using, and we're third from the bottom in the AAU rankings. And he said, well, what's kind of missing here is the med school should be, you know, in research should be about 4 times higher than Kaffner. We're not there. For us to make a shift, number one, do we want to make that kind of a shift? Are we making progress towards making that shift? What's it going to cost us in beds and revenue and everything else if we did make that shift? I mean, so can you just discuss some of that?
Well, a couple of things. Oftentimes, it's enticing for all of us to think that in an academic medical center that it's either clinical practice or academics. You have a very limited amount of resources. The best academic medical centers in the United States, it's both. So if you have outstanding research, you're going to attract the best recruits. And if you have the best recruits, you're going to attract more and more patients. They're going to be willing to come from farther and farther away to get those services. Jim Stannard's a perfect example of this. We recruited him, and think about what's been able to happen over time with orthopedics. We now know that Dr. Liu is going to be joining us from Ohio State University. He is an outstanding, world-renowned electrophysiologist in cardiology. He also happens to have 3 R01s. So we are attracting the best of the best right now. And these are recruits that I don't think in the past we would have gotten.
What's an R01?
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't. An R01 is the probably the bellwether, the % type of grant that you can get from the National Institute of Health. And we've had, I believe, double-digit percentage approaching a 20% increase in our National Institute of Health grant dollars. Those are the best type of School of Medicine grants you can get. So we must do a really good job of recruiting the best of the best that are out there. We've done that in cardiology. We're going to be doing that with child health as well. And so in all these chair packages, they need to come with a lot of research as well. And Dr. Dean Delafontaine and I know that, and we're actively working on it. So this is the one challenge, or not one, but one of our many challenges we've got, and we must improve in research, and we know that.
You might also touch, because not everybody is on the Health Affairs Committee, about your recent move of $10 million institutionalized to research at the med school, and that only happened since you've taken over as CEO.
Thank you. So on this slide in the upper right-hand corner, it says $16.3 million to the School of Medicine. That's what the performance-based support was for fiscal year 2017. So basically, we wrote a check on July the 20th or so for $16 million to the School of Medicine. It's hard for Dean Delafontaine to have that come in once a year. So what we did, and we all had to swallow a little hard on this one, is we said that we were going to make $10 million of that be guaranteed. And it's going to come in every single month so that Dean Delafontaine can be making the necessary investments to get the returns that, just like you're saying. And it's my hope that that'll be a heck of a lot bigger than $16.3 million next year. We need to be making investments in this over time, while at the same time meeting all of our days cash on hand and all of our financial targets as well. But this is did that answer your question, Curator Phillips? Thank you.
You made the point.
But the point is, Mr. Chairman, we haven't been doing that in the past. This is something essentially brand new that you and Patrick have implemented, and we've been trying to get movement like this for some time.
It's good, and it is also it becomes a fixed expense, but something that we need to do because it is a critical part of our mission.
So we know it's going to be $10 million every year.
Yep.
It may be a lot higher, but we know it's going to be 10.
Correct. Yes, curious.
Let me ask you, just going back what Curator Chapman said, but correct me if I'm wrong, and we have a ways to go, but over the past year, we actually have grown both clinical revenue and research. So
Absolutely.
we've had them both going up.
They are so interrelated. It's both.
Other questions?
Oh, totally different area, Jonathan. You know, we're going to talk tomorrow about branding of the university, and we all know that we need to do a better job of telling our story and branding. A couple, 3 years ago, the MU Health rolled out this YES program. I don't see much about that anymore. I don't know if that's still something you use, or if you're looking at some other ways to promote MU Health.
Yeah. Well, to me, yes, it is part of our culture. It's who we are. So when you go into our facilities, if you walk down the halls, if people are, and you're looking confused, one of our key efforts around caring within the culture of YES is a warm welcome, anticipating needs, fond farewell, and the 10-5 rule. If you don't feel welcomed in our facilities, based upon the culture of YES, then that's a major problem. So I personally have probably downplayed the branding and marketing, if you will, of YES, but I can assure you it is absolutely a part of our culture and what we do every single day.
On the nursing situation, are we getting the percentage of nurses we need from our nursing school graduates?
Thank you for asking that. We haven't met an idea yet we're not willing to try when it comes to recruitment. So we are working with Dean Miller for an accelerated nursing program. She was able to give us 8 additional slots in that area as long as we committed to providing the training associated with that. So it's moving in the right direction. That being said, we have some other great schools that are part of it. Central Methodist, Columbia College, Mobile Area Community Colleges are all wonderful schools that produce many bachelor nurses that we're more than willing to partner with.
Thank you.
Other questions?
One more. Jonathan, what's the time frame on this TPMC facility if we're going to build it? What's the time frame on that? Is it?
Where's Ryan? Yeah, Ryan, I'm going to defer to my colleague in terms of that.
So I think it would go through the capital planning process that we talked about today. And so I think when MU brings it forward, either at this late October, early November meeting, that's where we'd start to talk about what the timeline is for it.
But we are expecting to see it in October, November, right?
Correct.
And I think that's, I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good example. We need to make major investments in things like the TPMC if we want to be a National Cancer of Institute, NCI designated cancer center. It will be that sort of investment around precision medicine and oncology that's going to propel us forward. And it's just such a perfect example of engineering, vet school, school of medicine, and the hospital all working together to make something breathe life that's for the betterment of the state of Missouri.
That's a pretty good segue into the thing I wanted to say at the very end. Jonathan brought with him yesterday afternoon, and the new curators were able to see some of this, but he brought with him the Dean of Nursing at MU, Dean Miller, the Dean of Engineering at MU, Dean Laboa, Professor Jimmy Cook from the vet school, and they toured the Stowers Institute, they toured MRI, they had dinner with the new curators and some of the professors from the UMKC School of Medicine, and learned more about the dental school and the pharmacy school, which actually graduates folks in Columbia as well. And this morning there was a collaboration between those folks that came from MU and the folks at Stowers and some of the doctors about further collaboration. And part of that was sparked by the TPMC and the anticipation that some of the things that are available in Kansas City might be helpful to the precision medicine. So we appreciate your coming, and it was really a great opportunity, maybe serendipity, that the board meeting was here in Kansas City on this occasion.
You know, just getting back to the whole concept of MU Healthcare as a statewide resource, more and more and more, we need to be working with our colleagues at UMSL as well as UMKC, and I think that we will.
Well, thanks again. No further questions? Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan.
My pleasure.
We do have a compliance obligation with the federal government, and if we could have and we as the board, although this gets reported to the Health Affairs Committee, we as the board need to take quarterly stock of our compliance. And so we have the acting compliance officer, Jennifer May, if you'll give a quick report on it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time this afternoon. I'll be quick with this report. So this quarter, I decided to take this opportunity to just bring you up to speed, the full board up to speed on our year-end items. We've just completed our first reporting period under the Corporate Integrity Agreement, which is our agreement. It's a 5-year agreement, so we're down 1 year, so that's a good thing. That completed over the summer. And I am pleased to report to all of you that we have completed all requirements from the first reporting period. All submissions have been submitted and received by the Office of Inspector General and are being reviewed. So we are done with our first year, which is very good. But that doesn't mean we're going to put that aside. We're going to take this opportunity to really look at the annual report, look at the claims review that was filed as well, and take stock of what we learned from that experience and moving that forward for year 2 and what we need to do with that. We're still waiting for some feedback from the OIG. We had a switch in our monitor right before we turned in our annual report, so there's a little bit of a transition period that we're working on there, working with the new monitor, but that should be coming soon, hopefully getting some good information, good feedback from them on how we did from their perspective, but we're moving forward looking at it from our perspective to see where we can improve and what we can continue to do into year 2. So on that front, just as a reminder, each reporting period runs as basically the fiscal year. It just kind of worked out nicely that way with the way we signed the agreement. So we are in the middle of reporting period 2 right now, or in the start of it anyway, and working on that. The Health Affairs Committee is the committee that the Board of Curators has delegated for oversight responsibilities for the compliance program. So I wanted to just bring back forward the language from the Corporate Integrity Agreement that talks about the compliance obligations for the committee, and that is to have the quarterly meetings like we're doing now. So we'll have another one in the fall, in the next quarter. That one will be a little more focused on things that we're working on during reporting period 2. That's an opportunity for the Health Affairs Committee to take a look at the program and also the performance of the Chief Compliance Officer and our Compliance Committee, which is our Executive Compliance Committee, and that's made up of most of our leaders throughout MU Health, which includes not only Jonathan, but our 3 deans and a number of other individuals from across MU Healthcare. Another responsibility or obligation under the CIA is submission of a description of the documents and other materials that were reviewed during the period of time. So we do that in the annual report, and the report that you all have has a copy of what you saw from last year. So those types of materials and everything that we submit to you does get submitted to the OIG for their review as well. And then finally is adoption of a resolution summarizing your review throughout the year of our obligations and our compliance with federal healthcare programs, as well as the Corporate Integrity Agreement. So just a reminder that this is where we're headed towards the end of each reporting period, is to this type of resolution. This was the one that the Health Affairs Committee just signed for the end of reporting period 1 that concludes that and is included with the report. So that is really our wrap up from year 1. Just wanted to make sure that we put that on the record, that we finished year 1 successfully, and we are just now plowing ahead for year 2 and trying to continue to learn and continue to grow our program.
That's a huge report, about that thick, and we appreciate all the work that you and your staff have done over the year to make sure that we're in compliance. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Thank you, Curator Phillips. And thank you to the Health Affairs Committee, too, for your help and assistance.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We do have 2 action items. The first one is approval of minutes of the Health Affairs Committee. Actually, we've had 3 meetings where the minutes have not yet been approved: June 22, July 28, and earlier this month, September 14. They were in your materials, I believe. Are there any questions about the minutes? Is there a motion, I think, from within the committee to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Anybody? All right, second. Cindy, would you call the committee roll?
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Sunvold.
Yes.
You have all votes in favor.
And we have 2 other committee members who are not present, that are not on the board. We don't have to go beyond the committee approval. All right, thank you. The next is that we have an amendment to the collected rule and regulation 440.040, which is the physician's medical practice plan. I would say that this is kind of in the weeds, but it does require board approval, and we will call forward the executive director of University Physicians, Vic Arnold, to maybe give a brief summary and answer any questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your time and listening to this quick presentation. I'm Vic Arnold. I'm Executive Director of University Physicians, and been on the job about 60 days, so a little bit of a rookie. However, it's my 4th AMC. I worked at Stanford and University of Kansas before coming here. What I wanted to talk about today, hopefully do this right, is that the University of Physicians is the business arm, clinical business arm of the School of Medicine. And we have some changes operationally that we need to make. Our operating rules 440.040 haven't been changed since 1987, I believe. And there's several regulatory changes, several operational changes that need to be clarified. So at the bottom of the slide, what we're looking at is a better definition of faculty FTE for part-timers, a more clean process for defining when a physician goes moonlights, and then how an extended period for faculty recognition from 30 days to 60 days so we can take care of patients. And finally, some clarifying language around the regulatory process of assigning clinical income to the university that's done annually. So those are the areas of change that we're looking for approval for. The voting process for the faculty, we had 543 active voting members. We got our 2/3 majority. It was an extended voting period, but we did get that, and it was great. It was the first time for us to do this, so we learned a lot about how the process worked. We learned a lot about what changes are like. The only purpose here is to prove that we did do our process and our due diligence, and that we think that we're ready now to ask for resolution that's in your packet. That's it.
Any questions? Motion from the committee to accept, and we'll take it to the board. I guess I, as chair, will make, you want to make the motion?
So moved.
All right.
Second?
Please call a roll of the committee.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Sunbolt.
Yes.
Okay. All committee votes in favor.
So I move for approval. This one does require board approval.
Yes.
So I move that the amended collected rule and regulation 440.040 be adopted by the board. Would you call second?
Second?
Would you call the roll?
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Graham,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunbolt.
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Now move that we go into executive session of the Health Affairs Committee.
Second?
Would you call the roll?
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Sunbolt.
Yes.
Okay. All votes in favor.
Next item of business is under general business. Normally, we would at this time present for consideration a resolution honoring Leo Morton, who is retired as Chancellor of the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Leo had a commitment that would not permit him to be here this afternoon, but each of you have received a proposed resolution honoring Leo, and certainly if anyone deserves appropriate recognition, Leo does. Most of you, I think, know that he grew up in segregated Birmingham, went to a segregated school, then went on to Tuskegee University, and then got a graduate degree from MIT and had a very successful corporate career before ending up as a corporate officer here in Kansas City. Had a voluntary relationship with the UMKC as a member of the Board of Trustees, and then in 2008 was selected to be the interim chancellor, and 5 months after he had been selected to be the interim chancellor, he became the chancellor of UMKC, and has just had a remarkable career, and actually I think we all agree was the face of UMKC until his retirement. The wording of the resolution, I'm not going to read it, but was, I think, presented to each of you, so the chair would entertain a motion to approve the resolution honoring Leo Morton and also giving him the designation title of Chancellor Emeritus.
I would be honored to move approval of the resolution.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cindy, would you call the roll on that motion?
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Graham,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes?
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunbolt.
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Thank you. At this time, the board would entertain a resolution to move into executive session.
So move.
Second?
Call the roll.
Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Graham,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden,
Yes.
Curator Steelman,
Yes.
Curator Sunbolt.
Yes.
Okay,
All
except
votes in
for our
favor.
executive session, then the board will be in recess following our executive session until 9 a.m. tomorrow, at which time we'll again take up general business. Thank you.